Hello and welcome back to Death and Taxes, the podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and joined, as always, by Gene Tunny. How you doing, Gene?
Going well, thanks, John. Yeah, lots to talk about this week. Looking forward to the discussion, and we've got a great guest too. So, yeah, really excited to chat with you today.
Indeed. What we've got up today, the quick preview of things to come. Of course, we've got Gene's Roundup, the 10 minutes of your week that you can't do without to make sure you know whatever economic news you've missed. We're talking about the political news of the day. We're going to be dragging in a political strategist, former LNP staffer, former LNP or Liberal Party state director, Pete Coulson, to give us all the insider goss and all the stuff that we can't know about because we're not connected. And he's going to tell us his opinion on the future of the centre-right politics, One Nation, the LNP, and all that malarkey. And then we're going to talk tax, as we always do, and come back to the issue that I sent the newsletter about this morning. You may have seen a summary of the arguments on immigration, right? And it's not just red meat. I was trying to be as honest as I can be, laying out the arguments from both sides, but I have received hate mail anyway. So we will go through that. That's what we've got in front of us. But firstly, you'll be watching this on either Facebook, X, or the YouTubes, or Gene's LinkedIn. This goes to Gene's LinkedIn as well. If you're watching it wherever you are, please give it a like and a share. Please find us on those platforms and subscribe. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance on YouTube and Facebook, John Humphreys on X, Gene Tunny on LinkedIn. Please, like, share, subscribe. That helps the algorithm to know that material like this is good for the world to see, which I think it is. This is run by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au. Go there, check out what we're doing. If you feel like your wallet's a bit heavy and you'd like to lighten it, become a member. Throw us a couple of pennies each month. Helps us to keep the lights on. Appreciate it if you can. If you can't, that's fine. Go to the website anyway. Check out what we're doing and share it if you like it, because, we're in this to try and share ideas. So nothing's behind a paywall. So that's not a very good revenue raising model. Nothing's behind a paywall, so you don't actually have to pay. But yeah, some people do, and that's nice of them. So anyway, that's all the housekeeping. This is live, of course, so you'll see the mistakes as we make them, like me just forgetting to tell you it was live. We also take your comments and questions as we go. So anything you've got to say, agree, disagree, get angry at me for my newsletter, feel free to write in a comment. We will address most of them at the end. Although if they're particularly interesting, we may drag them up on stage early and happily get sidetracked.
Will you tell people why that? Will you tell us why people were angry at your newsletter later? Because I'd love to hear what people objected to.
Yeah, well, the Cliff Notes is, I think they were basically just saying it was I was being racist. So they're saying this was like immigrant bashing. I think they were saying it's like myopic immigrant bashing. And then I actually asked, I went back and said, what was specifically did you disagree with? And they listed a bunch of stuff, nearly all of which was exactly what I'd said in the article. So I guess they just didn't like my style. Maybe they didn't like the picture I used and they had in their mind that I was about to say something very different. But anyway, it happens. It happens. So with all of that introductory stuff out of the way, we've got another guest this week. This one is the fabulous mustache that comes with the human of Pete Coulson. Pete, how you doing?
G'day, guys. It's great to join you.
Yeah, he's joining us from Tassie, down in the Apple Isle.
Yeah.
That is exactly right. And that's probably going to account for a bit of the delay. And that's definitely not me thinking about just how many emails I'm going to get calling me racist for coming on a podcast with you guys to talk about immigration. But here we are. Let's get into it.
I love how the world has changed now that in this day and age, it's bad for you to associate with us instead of the other way around. But that's probably true now. It's probably true. That's how far we've fallen. But anyway, so the first thing we'll do, we'll dive into Gene's Roundup, because that's always how we kick things off. Most normal people aren't watching the economic news of the week because you're normal. Thankfully for you, we are not normal. So you can come here for 5 or 10 minutes a week and catch up on whatever economic news you've missed. And with that said, Gene, I'll throw you under the bus.
Okay, thanks, John. It's just a brief one this week. We're just catching up on the consumer price index, the inflation data. The January figures came out yesterday, and they surprised on the upside. So, I mean, bad news for the government. Inflation still running above the target on an annual basis, 3.8%. But what I've got there is the annualized rate for the core inflation figures, the weighted median and trimmed mean, and they're both bad news for the government because we've got the underlying inflation running, at 3.5% to 4%. So it's looking like we're probably going to see another interest rate increase, possible, most likely in May, but there's always a chance it happens before then. So in May they'll have the March quarter inflation data. So they often wait for the quarterly data before they pull the trigger. But just with these monthly figures, the persistence of inflation, they could go again. So not good news for the government. And all the usual suspects were brought out. Stephen Smith at Deloitte, Terry Rawns. I mean, all good people. I don't mean to bag them at all. So this shouldn't be interpreted negatively. But Terry and Stephen were in the AFR, and the News Corp papers, I think, being quoted along the lines of, well, it's the heavy government spending, too much that's contributing to the too much money chasing too few goods. So Jim Chalmers really has to fix the budget in May, or he's just going to get absolutely slammed by all commentators, and not just the people who would normally criticize him. I think people all over, all the sort of standard economic voices you'd hear in Australia, I think they will be universally getting stuck into Jim Chalmers if he doesn't show some restraint this budget. Okay, so that's basically all I wanted to cover today. I think, again, it's pretty bad news on the inflation front.
So, Gene, I just my eyesight isn't what it used to be. Which color is the underlying inflation there?
Well, they're both underlying measures. So I've got.
Okay.
I know you want me to call it pink. I'd call it magenta. But yeah, the pink line, that's the weighted median, and the dark blue line is the trimmed mean. Yeah, I should bump the font up on those charts, because my eyesight's not exactly great either. So, yes.
I'm all for you appealing to our LGBT audience there, Gene. So that's magenta it could be for today. But it's all right. So they're both underlying, and that's well above 3.5 now at 3.6, 3.8.
Yeah. So this is
that's
on
not pretty.
No, but these are the monthly figures. And I think there's still some concern about just how reliable these core measures are on a monthly basis. But
the other issue is these figures are for the month before the interest rates were already put up, right? So we haven't actually seen any impact of the last interest rate increase in these numbers, because there's a lag before the data comes out.
Yeah, but what impact would you see? I mean, we probably wouldn't see any impact on the interest rate, the cash rate change in February impacting inflation yet. I mean, it'd act with a lag, wouldn't it? So.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So we haven't seen it here. But look, this is too high to be solved with just a 25 basis points. So I don't know. Pete, have you got any thoughts on the ongoing inflation interest rate train wreck that Labor is walking into?
Well, I'm not looking forward to the next time I go to the IGA to pick up some cheese. Quite clearly, it's getting more and more expensive. I'd really like to know, though, Gene, in the last set of data that I looked at, power prices were a large increase, but it wasn't that the prices themselves had changed or the government subsidies were coming off.
Yeah.
Are you able to unpack any of these figures, and how much of this is because of government decisions?
Well, some of it is, I mean, clearly, but it's a bit broader than that. And I think that's why the RBA's concerned. And like these core inflation measures are supposed to be abstracting from that. I mean, they're supposed to be taking out those electricity, that rebound in electricity prices. So, that's part of the reason the headline rate is. But the problem that we've got, and that the Reserve Bank has, is that it's not just the headline rate that has rebounded because of the electricity subsidies coming off. It's the fact that these core inflation measures are higher than they should be, or higher that they're outside the target band. So that's part of the story explaining what's happened with the headline rate. But the situation is, the inflation is outside of that. It's not just confined to that. It's much broader, and that's why the Reserve Bank is going to have to act. If it was just the electricity price coming back because of the subsidies unwinding, the RBA would not have increased the cash rate in February, and they probably wouldn't be looking at further cash rate increases, which I think are very likely now.
I think we've been fairly consistent, both Gene and I, at disregarding whatever the headline rate was saying.
Yeah.
So last year, when Labor was putting on subsidies to artificially depress the inflation rate, we were saying that's a bullshit trick. Ignore that. Focus on the underlying inflation that's running high. Well, to be consistent, we do the same thing now, right? So now that they're taking it off, headline inflation bumps up. But again, that's kind of a bullshit stat. Ignore that. Focus on the underlying inflation. That's the honest thing to do. It doesn't help Labor. The underlying inflation now is hit the same as the headline inflation, right? Well, so the underlying problem is real, right? I mean, there is just a real problem of too much money chasing too few goods, and the bells and whistles that retail politicians put on it to try and hide the truth from the voting public isn't actually changing the underlying reality here. So.
Yeah. So what I've done there is I've annualized the monthly figures, but if you look at the data for the headline CPI is 3.8% through the year, weighted median, which is one of the core measures, that's 3.6, and then trimmed means 3.4. So they're a bit lower because they don't have that electricity price rebound, but they're still above where the RBA wants it to be. And so, they didn't increase rates enough to begin with, or they cut them too early. So, it looks
as
like
I said last time we did the inflation numbers, the good news is that the only things that are increasing in price is irrelevant things like food and accommodation. So you should be fine as long as you don't eat and don't need to live anywhere. Then you'll be able to avoid the worst of it. Yeah,
exactly.
All right. I'm sorry to say that I suspect right now around a couple of cabinet ERC meetings across the country, there'll be politicians suggesting that we should be introducing new measures to help households deal with cost of living increases. And then, of course, we've got an election in South Australia, an election coming in Victoria later this year, and one in New South Wales next year. And if we know one thing about elections, it leads to more spending.
Well, Pete, this is a question for you. Sorry, I was just going to ask. I mean, Pete, you're saying they're around the ERC or the Cabinet Budget Review Committee table, and they think, we should have some cost of living measures. Where's the money? Where's the money coming from? They're all running operating deficits, aren't they? Or well, our Queensland government's running an operating deficit. So you shouldn't be looking at any new spending items. You should actually be trying to cut from your recurrent spending because you're in a bad position to begin with. I mean, you're borrowing to pay wages or keep the lights on. I mean, do they just not get it, or is it just, we don't care, we'll just let a future government deal with that problem?
Look, there'll be some people who'll be questioning should they do a Faustian deal, kick it off until someone else has to come in and fix it all up. That is the cycle of politics in Queensland, in Australia, where one side spends the money and the other side should be relied on being able to come in and fix it all up. And are we going to see more of that? I would say we probably are, because Queensland's certainly seeing that. We saw a budget that David Janetsky inherited that had some pretty wild spending baked into it. To his credit, he has, in my view, taken some sustainable measures to bring it in. I know there's a lot of people who'd say that he should be acting more aggressively, and I would certainly question the wisdom of acting too quickly on those. But look, there has to be a debate about how long we can entertain discussion of every single state spending like crazy, thinking that we can just make it up by printing more money.
Especially since the states can't print money. I mean, Gene, this is going to go fundamentally to our old drinking argument about how you have this irrational faith in democracy. But the issue that the politicians are facing here is that there could very well be the most perfect policy in the world. If saying it aloud is going to get you to lose an election, they're not going to say it aloud. And then after they don't say it and haven't convinced anyone after they're elected, if they do it, they'll get massacred. So the political calculus here is, I know there's this old cliche that people like to tell themselves, and they certainly say it when a camera is pointed at them, that good policy is good politics. Sometimes it is. In the long term, it can be. But in the short term, there's a lot of good politics to be got out of bad policy. And I think politicians, they have a very good skill at finding those sweet spots. Not policy sweet spots, political sweet spots. And I'm not even throwing shade at the politicians. That's the nature of the incentive they're faced with. But we need to be a little bit realistic about that. They may well know full well that they're taking this country down the garden path to a very bad place. But when they look at their political incentives, they probably look at the calculus there and think, well, what other choice do I have? Like, hopefully I can just do it slightly less badly than the other guy, and then be able to sleep at night telling myself that. So I don't know if you're less cynical than I am, Pete. I mean, you're in a job where you have to be quite cynical, I would have thought, to prosper. But am I too black-pilled?
Look, I can certainly see why you've built up a very healthy level of cynicism over your career, John, and I probably wouldn't be too far away. Look, the reality is this. If there was ever a situation where it came time for certain policies to be considered, I think the reality is we're probably on the cusp of that part of the cycle. And so there's been some people in our political discourse that for a long time have been saying we need to be looking at these sort of measures. And I think, the sun's going to start to shine on that part of the debate. And I think when that happens, it's going to be very important for guys like you to lead rational and logical arguments, not just, the easy, well, let's just keep everyone calm and keep doling out the dough so we don't have to face the consequences of our own actions.
Now, since we're onto the political side of things, having put Gene's roundup away, onto politics, straight into it. I had other questions that I was going to ask you first, Pete, but you kind of hinted. You mentioned a few things earlier when you were talking about the upcoming elections. South Australian elections right around the corner. None of us are sitting in South Australia now, but as a political watcher, this is going to be the first big test of this tsunami that's happened on the right of politics in Australia. Gaze into your crystal ball. Pete, what's going to happen in South Australia?
Pauline Hanson will underperform, and there'll be a whole lot of people who'll get really excited about it. Look, the reality is South Australia's looked at this before. We had that with SA Best. We had that with the Xenophon team. What's happening down there is played out in some polling that I saw by Demos AU. You might have seen that this week about South Australia. I thought it was really fascinating that the Malinowskis government isn't really getting a 5-star return from voters. But the reality is that the Liberal opposition has a long way to go to prove a baseline level of competence before voters will give them the trust to have a go. And that's understandable. I mean, they've had the previous leader, David Spears, have to resign from Parliament after being charged in relation to drugs.
He's doing a comeback now?
Well, I did see that article. It'd be interesting if the former member for Black wants to have another go. But, that's a matter for the electors of that area. If they want to give him another shot, it'll be interesting to see if they do. His successor in the Liberal Party was there until late last year and then decided it was not for him and handed over to Ashton Hearn. Look, I've got to say, I've been very impressed with the way Ashton has taken to this election campaign. I sort of feel that my party from time to time can call on female leaders when it gets a little bit desperate. And you couldn't reasonably describe that situation any other way down there. I think she's done a really good job. I thought it was interesting that she even allowed Angus Taylor to join the campaign trail this week. That's a pretty gutsy move from Ashton Hearn. And I thought it was a good sign that the Liberal Party is getting behind Angus Taylor because nationally, division is death in the right. And so it was good to see them all getting there. Now, look, more to the point, how are things going to go over this next couple of weeks? Look, frankly speaking, when I talk to the people on the ground down there, one of the best things they can say is, well, people are starting to see some sympathy for the Liberal leader. If that's the best argument you got, I think, they're in for some comeuppance. So I think there is going to be a very strongly entrenched Malinowskis Labor government in there in South Australia. And on the other right-wing parties, look, I'll talk more about immigration. I'll talk more about the vacuum that Pauline Hanson has been stepping into later. But the one thing that we do know is that reactionary populist parties do not have real solutions. And when it comes to the voters, I think they see straight through it, a bit like Nigel Farage in the UK. And I'll look forward to talking more about that soon.
Well, I'm not a member of One Nation and never have been, but just to play devil's advocate, to push back here because they're not here to defend themselves. One would be people seeing through it. Well, at the moment, people are seeing One Nation in the polls, at least, as the preferred right-wing party in this country. I think fairly consistently in most of the polls, anyway. So I don't know if they are yet. I guess you're making a prediction that they will. You point to Farage. He's still leading the Tories by a significant margin and leading the Labour Party, and has been for over a year now. So if the idea is that exposure will eventually lead people to see through Farage, it hasn't happened so far. People would also potentially put Trump in a similar category, and he's done a comeback. Le Pen seems to have only gone up. Meloni is now the Prime Minister of Italy. Geert Wilders recently had his party as the biggest party in the Netherlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not obvious to me that people are all just seeing through the dissident right challenger. It seems that the dissident right challengers have a pretty good track record. Javier Milei in Argentina, to talk about the great sort of libertarian free market member of the dissident right family. It's not clear to me that people are just seeing through it. It seems to me we could have a step change. Historically, they have. And the other little point that I think if there was a One Nation person in the room, they would say, and I'll let you then respond to this one, when people say they don't have solutions, One Nation now has the like reams of pages of policy detail, and the Liberal Party does not. So when you look at the parties lined up next to each other with policy detail, I think One Nation actually has the most published policy details of any political party, with the potential exception of the Libertarians, but I mean, they're not really a big player. So I know it's probably a good, I think it's been a well means tested, focus grouped or poll tested phrase to say they're a party of complaint, but they have no solutions. But if they've actually got more solutions on the table, is that just a good spin line, or have you got anything to back it up with?
Let me just be very clear. So I'm not saying that all voters are seeing through the right in total. I'm talking about that particular movement. So I think there are more and more people, and it's going to increase as the economic situation, certainly here in Australia and around the world, if it continues on the trend that it is, we know that cycles like this happen where people start to look more to the right. And it's going to happen here in Australia as what would appear to be rising inflation leads to slower economic growth, leads to economic downturn, leads to jobs being lost, businesses closing, times getting tougher, and people start to wonder, well, you know, what's in it for me? And they shift more, in my view, to the right. The situation with Pauline Hanson specifically, and the problem that I have with that particular party is that it's very easy to point the finger to all Muslims being bad Muslims. It's very easy to say we're being swamped as a solution to a problem that a lot of people feel. Let me explain where I think this arises. The vacuum that has given One Nation the space that they're occupying now in Australia comes from two things. The first is the Liberal Party has stopped listening to a number of people in Australia, and Pauline Hanson is saying messages that until they're properly analysed and put to the blowtorch, at the moment, people are going to resonate with. So what are those messages? When I see immigration being the third highest issue being reported in series after series of public polling, I start to ask myself, what are people saying here? All right, we always see health being an important issue because people care about themselves or their loved ones and the interactions they have with public health, hospitals and health services and so on and so forth. When immigration pops up, in my mind, there's two messages there. The first is a social cohesion message. So after the awful Bondi massacre tragedy, there's a lot of people starting to go, oh, well, are we letting the right people into the country? I'm concerned about social cohesion across the country. But there's an underlying problem as well. When so many Australians can't buy the house that they want, when the house that in the area that they want to live is not available to them because they can't afford it or just, isn't possible, when they have to sit in congested roads to get to a job that they feel doesn't pay them enough money to have the lifestyle that they want, they look around and they go, well, there's something wrong here. There's too many people coming into this country. And I think that feeds a sentiment that is easy to point to and say, well, we've got too many people. All right. The underlying issue here is a broader complaint that I think around a third of Australians have right now. And that is they don't feel like they're part of the system. They don't feel like the system works in their interests. And so what's happening is these people feel like they're not getting ahead, like they're not getting what they want, but they do hear that a certain other cohort, a segment of the population are getting special treatment. And it's easy to see certain migrant groups and others getting a different ride, having come into the country and having the benefit of exchange rates on the way in, being able to buy property that they're not able to buy. They look at those people and they say, well, there's something wrong here because they're getting a better treatment than I am. And I feel like this is my country. And my country isn't giving me what I want. I'm not getting the deal, my part of the deal, from our economy and our community. So when I see 25%, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Australians telling pollsters that immigration's a problem, I see a big cohort in our community who say that they feel this country isn't working for them. And the Liberal Party has not properly addressed that problem yet. There's a bunch of reasons, we can go into that later. But when Pauline Hanson says messages like, oh, we're getting swamped, oh, there's no good Asian and no good Muslims, that plays to those sentiments and people resonate with them. And that's why I don't think she hasn't got a solution to this, because there's no easy solution to the fact that our housing market is the way that it is. We can have a debate about some of the measures that might have a difference. There's no easy solution. We can have a debate about whether or not you should shut down immigration altogether and what would be the effect on our economy. And I hope we get to unpack that more later on tonight. But I also don't think that the simple solution of slamming the door shut is going to be the solution that they think either. So when I say that they don't have solutions, and John, if you've read all these volumes, all these binders of policy, I'd love to know, what do they plan to do on those particular policy areas? Because I'm all ears. I'm up for that debate.
Well, I haven't memorized them. I did flick through them, but I can't do them off the top of my head, although I don't pretend to be a member of One Nation or anything like that. So I should be off the hook for not remembering it verbatim. But I don't think it's just a one-liner. I think they have the idea of the numbers they're aiming for, which visa categories they're going to cut back, which ones they're going to abolish, which ones they're going to still allow. Like it is a bit more nuanced than simply damn these darkies or whatever people characterize them as saying. Look, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that you went through there, and I think a lot of truth to it. I think this, just interpreting this as people's concern about, people say social cohesion. I think that's true. I think there's a degree to which people are worried that the culture they grew up with is evaporating under their feet. And I think there's an element of cultural cringe is the wrong word.
It's nostalgia.
But there's a cultural something going on here that I think we really struggle to talk about as a country because we haven't worked out how to talk about it without either being accused of being racist or accidentally sounding racist or something like that. And so it stops us having the conversation. I don't think we're going to be able to get through this topic without eventually learning how to have that conversation. And I don't pretend that I'm going to be able to only have it the correct way. But I do. But when you say social cohesion, I think that is the new sort of polite word people have found to be able to say they're worried about what's happening to their culture. And the housing and congestion, I think those are absolutely touchstones. Can I just quickly say two things? One is, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are some people out there who are motivated by resentment against the migrants. I'm sure those people are out there. Those people have always been there, and maybe that always made up the core group of people who are angry. I think we've got something else that's going on here. I think people are not just motivated now by resentment against those immigrants. Indeed, what I see a bit more of, and maybe I swim in the wrong circles. I've got a very biased sort of social circle that I swim in. But the sentence that I would say that would get most people nodding is, it's not the migrants' fault. It's our bloody politicians' fault. The migrants just did what was obviously in their interest, and good on them. And, I've met many of them, and they're fine people. But them being fine people doesn't mean our politicians did the right thing. Our politicians have screwed us over. There's billions of fine people all over the world. It doesn't mean they all need to be my neighbor. And I don't hate those people, but I'm starting to hate my politicians because it doesn't seem like they're putting the existing Australians first. They seem to have something else that calls on their loyalties before the interests of the
Well,
Australian people. So I don't think it's just resentment against migrants. Sorry, Gene?
Well, it's not just that. I mean, yeah, certainly there's that, and I mean there are concerns over rorting. It's also negligence. I think the fact that they let net overseas migration get to, what was it, 550,000 in 1 year, and over 2 years, over 1 million people. Like, where was the oversight of our immigration policy settings? That was a huge shock in a very short period of time as we came out of the pandemic and we were wanting things to go back to normal, and yet we have this big shock to the economy in our society, which has caused all sorts of problems. So I think it's
devil's advocate to you there, Gene. I think the defenders of the status quo would respond to that by saying that those big numbers after COVID was catch up, right? And so if you look at the total numbers in Australia, we actually haven't got back up to what the numbers would have been if COVID hadn't existed. So let's just say we normally have 250, then for 2 years we had 0. So after that, you need 2 years of 500 to catch up. Now, I'm not saying that's what should happen, but I think that's their argument. So to give them their due, how would you respond to that?
Well, I would say the problem with that argument is that with COVID, we had a change in people's demand for housing. So we actually had a reduction in the household occupancy ratio, because we had people, if they're working from home, maybe they didn't need an extra bedroom before. Now they want an extra bedroom to have a study or to be able to work from home. And so we had a change, like COVID changed our demand for housing. And so even though, sure, you could say it was catch up, but we didn't have enough. We're in a position where we wouldn't have enough housing for all these immigrants. And I think there's got to be, just that the large numbers coming in a short period, I think that's something people notice. And I think it certainly has caused a lot of congestion. Maybe it could have been the case that if things had continued on the way they were going, that we would have reached a point if we didn't have the pandemic where we'd start getting concerned about the numbers. But I'm not sure I buy that argument. I mean, I think it's undeniable that the immigration's had very profound, the high level of immigration has had adverse impacts on the economy and society.
Yeah. I would say that the debate really... Oh, sorry, John. I would say the debate needs to be a lot more than just what's the right number. It really does. I think our country couldn't operate without an effective immigration system. I'm going to be really blunt and say that I think the way the government's currently operating is probably a large part of the problem. Our visa system is slow, it's clunky, it's expensive, and you could improve a lot of that. But the reality is, we've got labour shortages right across the economy. In our home state of Queensland, it's a serious problem how Queensland's going to get ready for the 2032 games when you've got labour shortages in construction that we're facing. And so clearly there has to be some element of imported labour to handle some of those issues. And it's the same in a range of skilled and unskilled sectors across Australia for that sort of thing. And so I don't think the simplistic line that we're hearing of shut it all down really gets the job done. It has to be a bit smarter than that. And I think, a large element needs to be about making sure that the communities where people are moving into have the ability to be able to have a bit of a say around what levels of immigration should be coming into their community. If you have a look at some parts of Brisbane, it's hard to argue against the claim that they are overpopulated, that they're too full. You look at the housing market, and I certainly get the impression that given 4 or 5 years ago when I last, was up there living full time, that it's almost unrecognisable now, where there are suburbs that just would not be affordable. So I think that there is a space in this debate to have more of a conversation at a community level around what does it look like. And I think that would go some way, giving people an opportunity to have their input around this issue. And I think, and to finish on this point, I come back to what you said there before, John, we really can't move forward on this until we get to a point where we just settle down on the tribal name throwing and labeling, and just say, all right, well, let's have a fair income discussion around what does it look like in our community going forward, what works for us, and how do we achieve that in a way that's actually sustainable. Because if the first thing we're going to do is latch onto labels and throw around slurs, well, we're never going to deal with this problem, and we just wind up with a more divided community.
Absolutely. Although, of course, you would say that you being a racist, misogynistic, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic. What's the rest of them? Sexist? Have I missed any? That's a joke, everyone at home. So,
yeah. Hi, Mum. He's joking.
Well, kind of, Mum. So, look, one other thing I wanted to say from there, in response to your earlier comments. If we are to agree, put aside whether they've got the solutions, if we are to agree that a big part of the voting public has a legitimate concern about, I think, as you mentioned, social cohesion, housing and congestion, I think is the way you put it, which I think is quite accurate. If that's real, then that suggests to me a good reason to think that the support for One Nation will stick. Because I think the one narrative that I think I wouldn't be the only one putting forward. I don't really know if I fully hold to it, but the Liberals often say, oh, yes, yes, yes. We've eventually seen the opinion polls. People want us to say less immigration. Then they kind of say, oh, we'll take 4 people off and we'll take 3 people out of the student visa program. And then we'll let 2 of them back in when no one's looking. And people kind of, they don't believe the Liberals mean it anymore. So when the Liberals end up coming out with a mealy-mouthed, watered-down version, people aren't even going to believe that. Whereas Pauline, no one thinks she's an eloquent speaker. No one thinks she's a member of Mensa, God bless her. But people think she means what she says, and she says what she thinks. And I think that is the thing that people are being attracted to. And so that I don't think is going away. Her genuineness, I don't think, is going away. And if people at this point just want to be able to vote for someone who will take action on this issue, even if the action ends up being ham-fisted, but they haven't got to that part yet, why wouldn't they keep supporting One Nation up to the next federal election? So that's, I'm sort of going back to the earlier point about the politics of this.
The simple answer, John, is at some point, One Nation has to say what action they would take. And when they can put these policy positions forward, then I think people will make decisions based on whether or not they actually want to support that. Until then, we're going to have a whole lot of debate around motherhood statements, and we're going to have statements like, I've outlined before, suggesting that we're just going to shut immigration down. And the reality is that's too simplistic and it just won't work. Look, the simple fact of the matter is the Liberal Party does need to get back to values. Over the last couple of years, I think it's been pretty fair to say that the actions of that party, especially my party, in the late part of the Morrison government, did not align with the values and the expectations that people have from a government led by the Liberal Party and coalition. And you may have a similar opinion about some of the positions they've taken in opposition since. I know I was certainly surprised when the party went to the last election opposing a tax cut. That seems completely at odds with where you would expect the Liberal Party to be. But all of that being said, the one good thing about the Liberal Party being at its nadir, at the trough, at the bottom, is that a lot of these lessons start having to be learned. And if I look at the way Angus Taylor and his team have come out of the blocks, I believe at this point we're going to see positions that are taken in accordance with the Liberal Party values. I'm really excited to see what Tim Wilson's going to be bringing forward as Shadow Treasurer. I've got to say, Tim Wilson comes into that position for me with some pretty big expectations. At this point of the cycle, this is not the time for more mealy-mouthed, soundbite policies. We really need to see something fair income from Tim. And I don't think it's too extremist to say that it is potential that within a term or two, it could be an existential matter for the Liberal Party. And if there was ever a guy when the chips are down to come forward with some fair income ideas, I reckon Tim Wilson's the bloke to do that.
Yeah, well, does have a background for being quite the ideas man. I mean, he worked in ideas before he went into politics. I guess some people would say politics is the world of ideas. I've long thought that if you haven't worked out your ideas before you get into politics, it's too late. But Tim has spent years working out ideas before coming to politics. So hopefully we'll see. We'll see what they have the gumption to put forward. I suspect it's a cabinet decision. But people who've listened for a while have heard me say that the missing ingredient in our political system is courage. So we'll see if there is enough courage in that cabinet room to come up with some bold economic or tax policies. Speaking of which, we have, of course, for long-time listeners, we have been putting forward the ATA tax policy recommendations to the Liberal Party. We'll keep putting them out over the coming weeks, and hopefully they will listen or take some of them on board.
If Labor took them on board, you'd be happy too, John.
Well, yes. Well, actually, we have a campaign at ata.taxpayers.org.au. Go join, be a member. We have a tax campaign that we are pushing to Labor, right? Specifically, we're trying to tailor the campaigns to our audience, trying to be a bit more pragmatic than I may have been in my younger days when you knew me last, Pete. And the pitch to the Labor Party is to get rid of the 10% Medicare levy. Now, I'd be happy for the Liberal Party to do that as well. But it just seems to me getting rid of a regressive tax that primarily targets people on from $27,000 to $34,000 a year, where they pay a 10% marginal Medicare levy. That the whole situation seems absurd. But that seems like a tax cut that the Labor could potentially get behind. Pete, if you can convince your LNP friends to get behind it, that'd be good too. It's just stupid to have a 10% Medicare levy. Most people don't even know we have it. We have it by accident. I think if they knew we had it, they'd be outraged. But I have not been able to spark the sufficient outrage yet to get political action. And we've got the policies we're pitching for the Liberals or anyone, One Nation, Labor, to take on board, increase the tax-free threshold, allow family tax returns where you can put together 2 tax-free thresholds for your family. In case you have one person earning most of the income, they can take advantage of the tax-free threshold of their spouse. And what are the other ones? Indexing income tax rates, allowing some amount of savings to be tax deductible. And the fifth one is skipping my memory at the moment. Gene, help me out. Something else that's good. But
your savings proposal, you're exempting savings from income tax. Was that it?
Yeah. No, I mentioned that one, but there's something else in there. But anyway, we'll be putting more out. Look, one of the tax ideas that was put out by the Productivity Commission last year and has got another play at the end of last year, beginning of this year, is the idea of a company cash flow tax. So that is actually one of the ideas that we have floated in part, but in a very different way. I was basically just suggesting you allow full deductibility of investments. And only that, and not all the rest of the changes, which would be a cash flow tax of sorts. It would just be a very low tax version of a cash flow tax, if I could put it that way. What the Productivity Commission and Garneau and Labor are considering is not that. Theirs is less generous than mine would be. But it is floating around. It is getting serious discussion from the boffins. Pete, as an honorary boffin, have you got thoughts or insights? And this will go to you next, Gene, as well, for thoughts on the cash flow tax.
Well, look, can I make a gratuitous political remark and just say I'm not in any way shocked that a discussion that was supposed to be about productivity has wound up simply in a revenue measure for Jim Chalmers. I think he was possibly a little overambitious with where this all started. And if it winds up with just another tax or some tinkering around the edges on a few taxes, I think that really shows, again, my earlier point of how important it is that we do bring some courage back to some of the policy development processes around some of the party politics on this. I think more broadly, I'm inherently very untrustful of this whole process. I got to say, I want to be absolutely confident that what's actually being proposed is not going to have some pretty significant unintended consequences. When I think about some of the other operations that go on inside the economy, if you're picking up on a cash rather than an accrual basis so that people can't, offset certain measures and various other things, I suspect it would have a pretty fair old lick of cash coming into Canberra. And so I would want to see something that gave me some confidence that was all being done in a way that we could really understand what it's going to do to the economy. Because as I said, we in Australia, I don't think we have a revenue problem. I think that there is just too many levels of government spending too much money on a range of different things, and there are efficiencies that should be sought before we just go looking to raise income.
Gene?
Yeah, which proposal are we talking about? Are we talking about the PC's cash flow tax on top of the normal company income tax? So this is for the biggest
I think
companies?
a lot of Pete's comments would apply to both situations, both the cash flow tax discussion and the CGT tax discussion. It occurred to me as he was speaking that the conversation could work perhaps both ways. I think the CGT one is more of a naked tax grab, to be honest. The proposal being put by the Productivity Commission was intentionally aimed at being revenue neutral. And indeed, they then just sort of forcefully attached an appendix saying, here are all the ones we prefer. These are all revenue negative because we actually want to cut tax. You told us not to. So we've done what you asked on the first page. And then we've snuck in what we want to do later. Here's how you can cut company tax. But yeah, so Gene, do you have a take on this this Productivity Commission's cash flow tax idea in general?
Look, I think it's a bit of a mess what they've proposed. I can't see their proposal getting up. I think if you're going to introduce a cash flow tax, then replace the company income tax. Just get rid of it and introduce this cash flow tax instead. What they've proposed, it's based on this idea that there's all this super profit that's been earned by the big end of town in Australia. I mean, maybe to some extent there is some of that, but yeah, it just looks like a bit of it's just a mess. I think what they were trying to do was to improve the efficiency of the tax system, but not do it in a revenue neutral way. And the way they've engineered it, it's a bit of a Frankenstein, really. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? On this show?
We have, yes. I worry about that mixed system as well. My instinct would be just switch over. They address that in their report. They say the issue is that would be very revenue negative. It would be a significant tax cut to do it that way, and so that was beyond the scope of what they were asked to do. So yeah, I agree. Great, but they were saying like it was beyond the scope of what they were asked to do, and so they couldn't go that far. So what they do instead is they've suggested to take the company tax down from 30 to 20 for small and medium-sized businesses, and then add on a 5% cash flow tax. So you basically have two simultaneous company tax systems, a normal company tax and a cash flow company tax. But it's not simply additive because they are cutting the normal company tax to add on the cash flow tax. But as you say, having two simultaneous company taxes running in parallel is going to add a degree of administrative burden, compliance burden, just headaches. And look, I think that one issue, because they make the point that there's a lot of accountants already in these businesses that can work it out. It's not that hard to plug it into a spreadsheet. One thing that maybe this is just me coming at this, but I spend a bit of time looking at tax policy, going through the entrails, working out what makes sense, what doesn't, and what you can do about it. It takes a lot of study to even understand how the system works. And you need to understand it before you can suggest realistic changes. These changes being suggested will make it all that much harder for anyone to even be able to know what's going on. And how can you actually, I was complaining before that I haven't been able to get critical mass on getting rid of a ridiculous 10% tax that no one wants, but no one even knows exists, right? And the thing that stops me there is that no one knows it exists. And it sounds too wonky and difficult to explain, and people fall asleep before I finish my rant. The whole company tax system is going to be like that. I mean, arguably it already is, but how are people going to understand that the one company tax, the dividends are franked and the other dividends can't be franked? Most people don't even know what franking is. If you have to get into the fact that it's 80% franked, 20% not franked, give up. So that's my concern with that. My subtle suggestion to Alex Robson and the rest of the guys at the Productivity. Alex Robson's a good economist, by the way, a good man. He's worked on this issue. I think he might be wrong, but still a good man. My suggestion is, what about the idea if you allow small companies to have the cash flow tax if they want? And so you either have full on the company tax system. If you're a big company, you're stuck there. I'm sorry. If you're a small company, you can choose. Stick with the devil you know, or switch to the cash flow tax system. I suspect if you made the cash flow tax system as concessionary as I would want it to be, then anyone who knew how to switch would switch. And then you, over time, can just increase that threshold for the businesses that can apply. So that would be my way of doing it inside the Overton window, I guess, inside an affordable budget. But someone trickle this podcast after the Productivity Commission and see if they steal my idea.
Well, I think to go to your point, John, around the complexity of running dueling systems, dueling banjo tax systems, to me sounds like a bloody nightmare. And the classic example is something we saw in the last 2 weeks. You know, you got Senator Pocock out there wanting to make political points by comparing the PRRT, the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax, to beer tax or beer excise. I mean, the reality is that anyone who's paying PRRT is the same as in this situation that we're talking about now, paying a number of different streams of tax. And for him to politically cherry pick just one to make a comparison for a political point, well, I think it's disingenuous at best, but it really shows how complexity in the system can undermine faith in the broader economy. It allows political points to be made that really have no basis. Look, you know, if Senator Pocock wants to continue to play these disingenuous political games, well, I think it's really quite disappointing, because so far he's actually been pretty impressive as a senator, and for him to go and enter into the tax debate like this, to me, just strikes me as pretty ordinary behaviour.
I'm not surprised, Pete, that your focus is on the alcohol tax. So what are you drinking there?
That's between me and my doctor. But the reality here is, I think there should be less tax on beer. If that's his point, stick to it. That's great. But just picking part of the complex tax system makes the point that we shouldn't be adding more and more different types of taxes onto Australian companies. Let's try and make it more efficient, not more complex.
All right. So you're unimpressed with the proposal for the cash flow tax, this proposal. I think we all are somewhat unimpressed with the current proposal, though I got to put my cards on the table. Depending how it's done, I could be open to a cash flow tax. I don't think the concept is just out of the window. I think you need to see the details in the context.
Well, should we go over that, John? Just do a recap. I mean, you're probably better placed than I am, but I know enough about it to say that from a theory perspective, there are benefits in terms of being able to push the taxation onto those super profits or those economic rents and away from the normal return from capital. And that means that you're not discouraging investment in capital. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's... I got to say, I find the way a lot of the people talk about this actually adds a lot of the issues. So I'm going to ignore the way, because a lot of them do talk about it in those terms. And feel free to, Jade. I'm just going to not do that myself. Look, the company tax system, it taxes the profits that companies make. But how do you measure profits? Well, it's you take your revenue minus your costs, and one of the costs is how much your capital goods depreciate. So if you buy a $1,000 tractor, I know tractors cost more than $1,000. I'm keeping the maths easy. $1,000 tractor, it lasts for 10 years. So you can't say that $1,000 was a cost when you bought it. Instead, you can say there was a $100 cost for 10 years. So 100 times 10 equals 1,000. So you're depreciating the tractor. So it's an accrual counting system. So that's the company tax system we have. There's one fundamental change that a cash flow tax must have, and there's a bunch of other taxes it sometimes has. The big change is to allow you to write off that capital spending in the year you make the spend. Right. So instead of saying, I've got this big piece of capital, I can depreciate it over 10 years, you can just say, no, the cash went out the door. That's why it's called cash flow. The $1,000 went out the door this year. I can write that off as a cost of doing business this year. And what that does is it significantly decreases the amount of tax you have to pay in those years where you're making those big investments. It effectively, because of the time value of money, it decreases the total amount of the present value of the amount of tax you're paying. But it also just increases the incentive to make those investments, right? So it's less tax on making those investments. And to just use this as a springboard for our usual rant, and of course, don't think you're going to get away without me doing it. We have been in a per capita recession, in an economic funk for 10 years, right? This is our lost decade, Australia's lost economic decade. And the reason is fundamentally productivity, right? We just don't have enough productivity. Productivity has been stagnant for a decade. Productivity comes down to two things. They'll talk lots of stuff about this R&D, investments in education. It's mostly bullshit. Two things: investment and innovation. Investment and innovation. Repeat, repeat, repeat. How do you spark that? Well, there's only really three things that are guaranteed to push it in the right direction: lower taxes, less regulation, cheaper energy. And that's what we always come back to that in this show. So you need productivity, investment and innovation, lower taxes, less regulation, cheaper energy. And we're talking directly about the tax on investment. This is core to the whole productivity discussion.
Yeah.
We're not fixing the productivity discussion unless we fix this. And so that is the appeal of the cash flow tax. It is less tax on capital investment in the company tax system. Now, there's a sting in the tail. If it was just a tax cut, it would be a lot less revenue. And by the way, that's the version I want, right? I just want our company tax system with instant asset write-off up to unlimited amounts, right? That's basically saying the same thing, right? You're just allowed to fully write off your capital investments. What Russ Garneau suggested, Lindsay Tanner, now the Productivity Commission, they suggest that, and then they also say, but you can't write off your interest payments. All right, so they do have a sting in the tail, right? So it's they give with one hand, take away with the other. And then they also, if you look at the Productivity Commission's version, they only do it with half of the company tax, and then it gets as messy as we mentioned before. But I think the really interesting part of this discussion is decreasing the tax on the investments that companies make, because that's exactly what we should be encouraging.
Yes.
And so I think the Liberal Party policy that was correct at the last election, I mean, there was more than one, but the one that it wasn't a very sexy topic, but it is one of the few that actually would have pushed productivity in the right direction, is they wanted to expand the instant asset write-off, which is to expand the amount of capital investments a business could make and instantly write it off against their revenue so they could pay less tax when they're making those investments.
Yeah.
That was a good policy, unambiguously good. Keep doing that, more of that. And cash flow tax, when done correctly, is just a really big version of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, John. That's a good explanation.
All right, let's clip that.
I think to the point, if we're on the same point, and I suspect after that we are, if we're arriving at a situation where the system is less complex and you're taking out other elements with this, well, the cash flow tax might be worth looking at. But as I understand, the proposition is dueling banjos, and more complexity in this system is not the way to go. Yeah,
I think there's a bit of agreement on this panel about skepticism for the exact proposal being put forward. Now, another tax that's been discussed a bit lately has been the capital gains tax. We've dived into that, Gene, I think 2 or 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah,
but there has been some more news on it, Gene. What's happened in the world?
Oh, well, now we've got the idea that the discount will be cut to 33% from 50%. The Labor policy that Shorten took to the election in 2019 was to cut it from 50 to 60. So it's, 50 to 25. It's not quite that bad, but it's still, very significant cut. And Ken Henry, our old boss, John, at Treasury, has come out and is supportive of it, and has been, said some rather, I was quite surprised at some of the things he said. I mean, Ken's a very bright guy, and have a lot of respect for him, but I'm not sure if I agree with this point he makes here. He says that rental property investments are primarily under Australian tax law a vehicle for sheltering wage and salary income from tax. And I just think that's going too far, really. I mean, they're an investment people are making for their economic security, aren't they? I mean, it's not a tax dodge. It's a legitimate investment people can make to earn income for themselves. I mean, the way Ken expresses it sounds very nefarious. I'm not totally sure I agree with that commentary, and I think it's about, in a way, it's demonizing the property investors as being the source of the problems we've got in the property market, which I don't think is correct either. I think a lot of it is coming down to, it's at the local level. It's just how hard it is to develop anything. And also on the demand side, it's the high level of population growth, which is related to the immigration policy settings we talked about before. I think the tax policy settings not the major issue here.
I read into his comments that he'd really want to be talking about negative gearing, and he's using those arguments in a CGT debate. Look, the reality is, as a nation, we need to decide whether or not housing's a right or an investment vehicle, and set our preferences and policy settings towards that. But on this particular point, if private investors aren't the ones footing the bill for rentals, then who's going to do it? Is the government going to really consider outlaying all the capital cost for rental stock? I mean, that's just absurd. And the counter proposition that if you're going to pull the rug out from investors who've built up this stock of private rentals, I think is one that a lot of people like to talk about because it's an easy political solution. It's easy to say there is a political fix at the end of that, a bit of a yellow brick road argument. But the reality is it's a much more complex and difficult situation. You go tinkering with those investment settings. If you disincentivize people from investing in rentals, that capital will, of course, go to where it gets the better return. And then who's left having to fund all of the, the future rental stock that the community desperately needs? Is it really going to be the government to step in and do that? No, of course not.
Yeah, I got to say, I find a lot of these discussions, and it comes from both major sides of politics and nearly all of the media, really kind of misses the point where they're talking about how to get a renter into their own home. And that's great. Look, I would love more renters to be in their own home and fixing the tax system to achieve that, great. But I mean, the issue we've got now is there just aren't enough homes for the number of people who need to live there, right? That's the big issue. And if you take someone who used to be a renter and instead of renting their house, they own their house, that's great. That hasn't created an extra house, right? That hasn't actually fundamentally changed the supply or demand of the situation. It's just, changed it from one column of living to the other. And so it's not unimportant. I think home ownership is an important thing. And, for someone involved in the LNP, I got to say, Pete, the two things that make people more conservative or right-wing voting as they get older is getting married and buying a house. So the fact that marriage rates and home ownership are going down is a structural long-term problem for right-wing politics. Incentivize home ownership and families if you want to keep winning in the future.
I completely agree. And look, the thing about it is, let me jump in on that. Why is housing so expensive in Australia? It's largely government and left-wing policies that have been doing it. The government's over-bureaucratisation of the planning system that just makes it so bloody expensive for private developers to bring new properties into the market, and the green policies that have continually made it more expensive on the input side. We don't have enough forestry. We've taken away and restricted the amount of native forestry and plantation forestry to build cheaper houses. I mean, you've got quarries, whether it's cement or ag, right across the country. It is an absolute, I wanted to curse, I won't. It's very challenging to bring forward new quarry developments anywhere across the country. There's one down on the Gold Coast, for example, right now. It's having an absolute devil of a time. And then we all turn around and we wonder, why is it so expensive to build a new home? Well, look, the reality is government needs to get out of the way on a bunch of those factors. And it's once again, this is not something that's going to have a simple fix, because we've allowed these settings to build up over a period of time, largely defended by what they would say is quite moralistic or altruistic reasons for bringing these settings in. But the result is no one can buy a house.
There was one other thing you said there that I feel like if Cam Murray's watching, he'll be throwing tomatoes at the screen if I don't mention it on his behalf. When you say, if it's not the private developments, who's going to build the houses? There are people out there who say, yes, the government. You can build houses. It has been done before in, I think, Singapore and Hong Kong, and the Australian government does do it for defence workers. Now, it's not my first choice. It's not my first preference. But I got to say, at some point, we have to say that the building of the house becomes more important than the exact way we get there. And so I am a free marketeer at heart. It's not where I want to go. But we do have to admit that is one of the options on the table. And if there are other people out there that are just preventing houses from existing, then perhaps Cam Murray and his soft communism is an improvement on that. So there you go, Cam. I was just making your argument for you in your absence.
So, John, I mean, fair point. I mean, I don't think that's the ideal solution, but I mean, you do have to acknowledge that is a possibility. I mean, it's what they did in the UK in the 50s, and even under a Conservative government. I mean, Harold Macmillan rose in political favour because he ended up he oversaw 1 million new houses, didn't he, of those new council houses. Now, one of the issues they've had is they built all these council flats very quickly, and, some of them effectively turned into ghettos, didn't they? Very bad, just not an optimal situation. So we probably, I don't want to demonize public housing, of course, so I wouldn't want to do that, but we need to, I think we need a mix of development. There may be a scope for some social housing for people who'd fall through the cracks, but we don't want to solely rely upon it, because then we do run the risk of creating, these public housing estates with all sorts of entrenched social problems.
No, quite right. I try to simultaneously wear two hats. I mean, I want to have it verbalized on this show what is the objective economics, and then I follow up quickly in saying, but these are my strong biases on top of it. So I just wanted to be objective in saying that's an option. And then my strong bias is that we sort of radically deregulate zoning development and housing standard laws, so that you can just have a boom of construction and probably wind back the amount of immigration as well, so that you can do something on supply and demand at the same time.
Yeah.
And that would be, in my mind, the solution. I want urban sprawl. Build, baby, build, but build outwards, so that people can have backyards, so that people have kids. My bias. I'm a pro-natalist, and backyards lead to more kids. So urban sprawl, baby. Cheaper petrol, cheaper cars, build out in the burbs. But that's my rant there. Look, we have got over the hour mark, and we haven't got to the meat and potatoes yet. So if with your guys' indulgence, let's dive into the ATA's newsletter from this week. We sent it out. You would have got it this morning, hopefully, when you woke up in your inbox. If you aren't subscribed yet, please go along and subscribe. It is at oztaxpayers.substack.com. You can also access it from our website, taxpayers.org.au. It is free. If you like what we do, please consider becoming a member. It doesn't really get you anything extra. It just helps us to keep the lights on. We keep everything in front of the paywall. It's not hidden. We do that because we want to, spark the conversations and be in the debate. So hiding our information from you wouldn't achieve that. So go along there and check out what we're doing. But if you already subscribed, you would have seen the email. This week was inspired by an article that came out of the Australian newspaper earlier in the week, where they said, if one nation got their way and scrapped immigration, zero net immigration, it would be totally unviable, just what Pete was saying earlier. And it would, they said, blow a massive hole in their budget, in the order of $420 billion increase in debt over the next 10 years. And so I saw that article, and then I looked up the model they used, and then I saw a bunch of commentary that was on the top of it. And I was inspired to respond, because there's an element of truth in what was said in that article, but there was also a lot of misdirection. So a few things to set the stage. There are a lot of arguments when it comes to immigration that are basically just bunk on both sides, right? They really aren't relevant, but people get very vexed about. And people who have already decided what their opinion is going to be, what the conclusion is going to be, jump on whichever of these arguments that looks like it's going to back up their pre-existing conclusion. But if we care about good public policy, I implore you to come with me on a journey of actually trying to find out which bits are true. All right. So firstly, immigration pushes up GDP. True and irrelevant. No one gives a shit. It doesn't mean anything. Total GDP is not relevant. It doesn't even try to measure the quality of your life. It doesn't even pretend that's what it does, right? So it's not like it does it badly. It doesn't even try to. So anyone who's talking about that, just ignore them out of hand, right? They're not being serious. But we do have the more nuanced version of that, which is to say, well, what about sort of GDP per capita, or even better, GDP per hour worked? And look, that sounds wanky and esoteric and pointy-headed economists. What it means is, how's your wage doing, and do you have a job? Right? And people care about that, right? I mean, that actually does impact the quality of your life. How's your wage going, and do you have a job? And proponents of immigration say, bring over the immigrants. It'll help boost your wages. It'll help create jobs. There's an element of truth to that. Opponents of immigration say, don't have immigrants over here. They'll compete with local workers, drive down the wages, and you'll have fewer jobs. There's an element of truth to that. We can look at the data, and what it basically says is, it's about a net, right? It doesn't make much difference. This is not really a relevant conversation. I mean, wages are important, but high immigration, low immigration, it's a rounding error in terms of its impact on your wages and your employment, right? And that's been in Australia. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just on that, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the economy and the circumstances. And I think I agree with you in Australia. I think that's broadly accurate.
Oh, in America too. I mean, this is fairly consistent to say in a lot of countries and through a lot of decades, they've found you can slice it up. And if you're looking at specific types of people, you can find small positive or negative impact. And so, look, it's not going to be totally inconsequential, but there are big impacts of immigration. And this isn't one of them, right? It's one that we're excited about, but it's not a big impact. So I'm going to park that and say that's one of the false issues of immigration. Total GDP, impact on wages and jobs, a false issue of immigration. Another one is, and one of the topics I love to rant about is declining fertility. We're all going to get old and then humans will die off. And one of the cliche solutions to that is import a bunch of young people to replace the kids that we're not having. And look, there's truth to that. The fertility is falling in a hole all around the world. We're about to have an aging population, and then the population is going to start falling. And I think it'll be the biggest, most significant thing that we live through in our lifetimes. But it doesn't lead to the conclusion they're saying, because that solution doesn't work. Bringing in new immigrants doesn't work for the reason that the government's own report states quite clearly, immigrants get old too, right? So it only works if you bring in exponentially more immigrants every year, right? And obviously you can't bring in exponentially more every year. That's a Ponzi scheme. It soon runs out and it collapses, right? So that is not a solution to that problem. Real problem, not a solution. So those three, they're off the table. They're not an argument for or against immigration. They're interesting arguments in and of themselves on a different topic, on a different day. So what are the arguments that actually do make a difference? Well, let me start by pointing to the winners from immigration. And one of them is the one they mentioned in that Australian article, right? The big winner, I would say, the most politically consequential winner is the federal government. And the federal government does get a windfall because new migrants come in. Most come in on a skilled, so when they become PRs, permanent residents, most of them are coming in on a skilled visa. And many of them get a job quite quickly. We didn't have to pay for them to go to school, and now they're paying income tax straight away. If they were particularly sick, they would have been rejected from the visa, so they're not racking up big health costs in the short term. And there's truth to that, right? I mean, that was the core of what was coming out of the Australian article. Now, the Australian article's modeling was kind of bullshit because they just say, well, let's only look at it short term, so we never have to worry about aged care or pensions because we didn't look that far in the future. But, migrants do get old. And let's assume that none of them ever go on the NDIS or never use the PBS, which, spoiler, they do. And let's not worry about state governments because, screw it, it makes the maths too difficult. And let's not worry about infrastructure because I'm sure if we add a couple of million new people, we won't need any extra roads or anything. So we'll just ignore that part. So that's why I said the modeling was dodgy. But let's admit it. It's good to admit what's true, even when it's not what you want to be true. And the truth is, the federal government does get a big chunk of extra revenue from new migrants, and they're also some of the biggest spookers for having high immigration. Align the incentives, quid bono.
And the other point, are you going to make the point about the unis that it helps support? It means the federal government doesn't have to stump up as much money to the universities as well?
Yeah, I didn't actually include that in the article, but that is true. The immigration, because most of this I was focusing on the PRs, and students are obviously coming in under temporary visas. Of course, everyone knows it's a backdoor system into permanent residency.
Yeah.
And yes, look, the number of people we've got under student visas is massively cross-subsidizing the cost of Australian universities. So that's a benefit to those people who want to study underwater basket weaving or lesbian dance theory or whatever it is they're studying at university that isn't useful. At least there's a foreign student overpaying for their degree so that you can get subsidized bullshittery in your degree. The other winner, just to go through the winners, the other winner is property developers, property investors. Now, I want to be clear, like I was saying before with ripping on immigrants, I don't think it's the immigrants' fault, and I don't think it's the property developers' fault. I think it's the policy's fault, right? The policy maker. Blame the politician. More seriously, blame the bureaucrat behind the politician that gave the politician the talking points, and then they just mouthed it like a robot. So blame those bureaucrats that work in our old workplace, Gene, Treasury. and the rest of them. And
it's not the same treasury though, John. It's changed. Yeah, it's certainly changed.
I agree because we left, Jen. So
yeah,
lots of stuff to scratch. But
very
anyway,
political modelling nowadays. Very political.
I'm not ripping on the property developers. They followed their incentives, but the truth is they are a winner here, right? So they get to sit on property that is look at. This is one of the things that people wrote back to me complaining, saying, I can't believe you're blaming immigrants for the house prices. I didn't say they're the only thing, right? Obviously, the zoning laws, the delays in approvals is a big issue. But it's one part of it. It's supply and demand, and that's the demand. And the issue is the elasticity of supply is low, right? It's inelastic supply. When people are willing to pay more, houses don't pop up quickly, right? If they were popping up quickly, that's elastic supply. That's what you want. We don't have elastic supply. So when you push up demand, it takes a long time for the housing supply to catch up with that demand. And in the meantime, you get this housing stress, and that pushes up rents, and pushing up rents pushes up house prices, because ultimately the house price is an estimate of the present value of the future flow of those rents, right? To get all jargony on you. So look, clearly increasing the demand with this immigration, with this high immigration, is putting up house prices. The beneficiary are property investors, not people who own their own house. Because if you own your own house and your house is worth $500,000, and then next year your house is worth $1 million, nothing about your life is better, right? You've still got the same tea on the same table. You've still got the same blinds, the same bed. And if you sell your house to buy another one, well, you're buying and selling into the same market, right? So it doesn't really help you. But if you're a property investor, you live in a house, plus you've got an extra one, your investments are going up at a nice rate, right? So those people are doing well. So those are the winners. Good to have winners in the world. The costs, well, the obvious flip side on the housing thing is anybody who wants to buy a house or anyone who's renting. And this is where the big neon light should start, flashing, because what we're basically talking about is a massive wealth transfer. The housing bubble, which in part is caused by our high migration levels, is a massive wealth transfer from the young and relatively poor. These are the renters and people who haven't bought a house yet, who tend to be young and relatively poor, and they are transferring more and more of their money to the old and relatively rich. And it's not the old and rich people's fault, it's the system's fault, but that is what's happening, and it is creating resentment. It is creating anger. It is creating isolation, disillusionment with the system. It's creating people who are just happy to see the whole system burn, people who are being kicked out of their community and losing a sense of community, and being alienated from where they grew up. It is creating a lot of consequences that can be hard for an economist to accurately measure with like a clear number, but they matter, right? And I would argue, and I don't think it would take too much to convince people, that the cost that we are imposing on the young and poor is a bigger problem than the benefit we're giving to the old and rich, right? This whole housing situation has winners and losers, but in total, I think it's a disaster. Not just because of the impact on the young and poor, but also because the housing bubble is incentivizing people with savings. Do you use those savings to invest in productive capital? Which, again, remember, investing in productive capital is one of the only things that increases productivity and gets wages to go up. But no, we don't do that. We speculate in the housing roulette, in the housing casino. All right. So we are diverting capital away from productive ends while we alienate young people and make sure they can never afford housing. And I think that is a dangerous path to go down. Anyway, and the second big loser from immigration is the issue of congestion. Pete, you raised this before, but I'd word it as underinvestment in infrastructure, or it's sometimes called as capital shallowing. Shallow infrastructure, where you've got a certain amount of infrastructure. Let's use a silly example. There's 10 people in a bridge, but when you get like hundreds of people, you need more than one bridge. But if you still only got the one bridge, you've got all those people on that one bridge. That's your capital is shallower, right? Your infrastructure is being stretched. You can imagine the congestion on that one bridge, but also that bridge is just working less well now. It's taking longer to get places. And that happens all over the place. It's not just bridges. You've got road and rail, ports and airports. You've got water and sewage. You've got energy infrastructure. You've got communications infrastructure. You've got hospitals. You've got schools. All of these things, if you don't build more of them, then they are getting stretched, right? They're getting congested, and there is an underinvestment in them. They're getting slower. Their quality is going down. And the solution to that is build, baby, build, right? Build more infrastructure. Build the roads. Build the ports, build the hospitals, build the schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's truth to that. But the reality is, again, we might wish that that was instant, but the elasticity of supply is low. It takes time. Firstly, they're often political decisions. And spoiler, not every politician is perfect. Most of them, of course, but not every single one. So it requires the correct political decisions to be made. But then it also takes a lot of time and a hell of a lot of money. And if you factor in all of that money, it basically undoes all of the revenue benefits to the federal government. Now, it gets a bit tricky because the state government has to pay for a lot of that infrastructure. So they're getting a lot of the costs, but the federal government's getting a lot of the revenue, which creates a bad incentive problem with our federation, which is another rant for another day. But in total, this infrastructure costs are creating congestion and anger and capital shallowing. And the cost of replacing that infrastructure or upgrading it is undermining the first benefit that we talked about. So anyway, those are all the economic arguments for and against. Reasonable people can quibble there, all right? So people can say, oh, that infrastructure problem is fixable. The revenue benefit to the government is huge, so I actually like immigration. And people can say, oh, look, I think the infrastructure cost is actually much bigger than you think. It totally swamps the revenue benefit. So this immigration is sending us backwards. Reasonable people can have that discussion, and they do. They don't always have it in reasonable ways, but they do. I would argue, though, that there is behind all of this, I mentioned it earlier in this show, a much bigger issue that is often being left unsaid. For a lot of people, the cultural impact outweighs all of these economic considerations. I think, and it's difficult to have the conversation because everyone's scared of being called a racist, but at some stage, it's the conversation we have to have head on. I think there is a growing concern that immigration may be having fundamental and irreversible impacts on our culture in ways that the people who already lived in this country didn't necessarily want, right? Didn't sign up to, didn't agree to. And again, you have to, both sides of this, cultures always evolve, right? There has never been a time in history where cultures haven't evolved, right? I mean, there's been some quite big evolutions of culture changing over the years. History is all the interesting times in history is probably a moment of a big cultural evolution, right? So this always happens. But there is a difference between cultural evolution and cultural replacement. Dangerous topics to have, but I mean, just to use abstract examples, keep it away from Western civilization so that hopefully I'm not called racist. But the Japanese, when they were, gunboat diplomacy, they were forced to open up. They suddenly got a lot of foreign influence when a lot of Americans started showing up there and significantly changed Japanese culture. I would argue that it's still Japanese culture. It's just Japanese culture that has evolved through foreign influence. And that's normal, and that happens. I would also point to some areas on the Tibetan plateau where that used to be Tibetan, and now it's just 80, 90% Han Chinese. And the Tibetans have just been replaced. And when most people hear about that, they don't go, oh, yay, wonderful diversity, I love it. That's not evolution of Tibetan culture. Right? The Tibetans are a small minority, and then they eventually go somewhere else. And that is them being replaced. Not everywhere in Tibet, by the way. Lots of places in Tibet still. But when you hear that, I don't think people look at those towns that went from a Tibetan town to a Han Chinese town and think, oh, that's cultural evolution. No, they got replaced. They got moved on. There's a different people there now. And I'm not saying that's happening in Australia, but if we admit that both are possible, then you have to ask, well, what's the difference? Right? Neither of the examples I gave were an invasion. They were both examples of people coming in and influencing a culture. One, only a few people came in, and the other one, a huge amount of people came in and then didn't change. And I don't know where the line is, and I'm not saying we've crossed the line. But clearly, if you accept that there is such a thing as cultural replacement, such as the Tibetans, and lots of other examples through history as well, if you agree that it can exist as a concept, clearly there has to be a point where so many new people have come in and not integrated and assimilated that it now constitutes a replacement. And I'm not saying we're there yet, but if it's theoretically possible, when do we get there? Like, where is the line? And if you don't know where the line is, how do you know we haven't crossed it? And if you care about not having the culture replaced, you should care about trying to find out where that line is, because that seems like a thing that could be bloody important to a lot of people. If you like being an Australian, and plenty of people still do, if you have any loyalty to the concept of being an Australian, and plenty of people still do, some of those people are worried about this question. And preemptively dismissing them and calling them a racist, I don't think is going to convince them. Because it's like telling these Tibetans on the edge of the Tibetan plateau, you should be fine with having all of these Han Chinese people here. You're jumping at shadows. There's nothing to worry about. Sometimes there is. And we at least need to take their concerns seriously and have a serious discussion about how can we ensure that migrants give us sort of the positive cultural evolution without threatening to replace us. And I don't know. I don't have all the answers to that. Sorry.
Bravo, John. I have to say, I mean, I don't know enough about the Tibetan example that you're using to comment on that. But what you've encapsulated there, I think, is the grievance that something like a quarter of the population right now are talking about. And that is, we do, there is an uncomfortableness that arises across a lot of Australians who would say, well, I'm a bit uncomfortable. The cultural things around me are changing. Now, I mean, from my perspective, I think culture is never static. It always changes. The Australia of 20 years ago, even if we had no migration, could not be the same. And if it was, arguably that'd be a bit of an unhealthy thing. It does need to change. There are things in our culture, in our society that require ongoing growth. And I think that's a very healthy thing. To the extent that there is a negative implication that introducing certain other communities into our culture, though, is a negative thing, well, I think there's a couple of different things to unpack in that. I think, first of all, it is absolutely right, as you've observed, that some people feel uncomfortable around that. I'm acknowledging it. I'm not saying that it's right that they should feel like it, but I acknowledge that it is right to say that people do feel uncomfortable about that. The second thing I'd point to is that when these things have not happened in a incremental or sustainable or pragmatic way, I think that's possibly what you're driving at there in the Tibetan situation, where if I were to jump in a time machine and go to 1960s Cabramatta in Sydney to now, or if I was to jump in a time machine and go from 1980s Inala to now in our part of the world, it'd be pretty different. And I'm not of the view that that's a bad thing. I think in a lot of respects, that change has been a very good thing and brings about some very important and dynamic aspects to our culture and things that should be celebrated, because it's been done in a way that has added a whole new vibrancy to the way in which our society operates. I think, though, you do raise a really good point, and it represents one that is a very challenging part of this whole immigration debate. Is there a line? Is there something that at the end of all of our fears, at the end of the fears that are being discussed here, that it could lead to some kind of social breakdown or community conflict? Do you have a situation where, as you're alluding to with the Tibetans, that we wind up in a situation where you're the last person left? Now, look, I heard an example the other day, made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but I'll share it with you. Someone told me about a school that I'm aware of in the south side of Brisbane. And I'm told, look, I haven't checked this out, but this is what I've been told, is that, in the 90s and early 2000s, it was largely a Caucasian school. And there are a couple of Asian kids and there are a couple of African kids and so on and so forth. Today, I'm told that some of those classes have, only 2 or 3 Caucasian kids in there. And the point was made to me that this was an example of where, you had these situations that made people feel quite uncomfortable about the makeup of the various people groups in these classes. And I think that might capture, this point you're driving at is there a tipping point? Is there a situation, or is there a fork in the road that we arrive at some point down this, that there's an irrevocable change to our community, potentially for the worse, for the negative? I think there's at the very least, a worthwhile debate at that point around, well, what does society look like? And as I said to you before, I think communities should be able to be consulted at the very least, but preferably empowered to be able to have a say around what their community is going to look like going forward. And I think that to the extent that we should allow people to have that debate, it is something that is healthy and should be encouraged. But I digress. To come back to where do we get to this tipping point? From my perspective, look, I'm not convinced that the end point is entirely negative. I think it'll be challenging, but I don't think just adding people from other cultures, other parts of the world, is necessarily a bad thing, generally speaking. I think that there are ways that it's been done very poorly, where we haven't given people either in the existing community or the people coming in the support to be able to integrate into society, into the existing society. And if that leads to disconnect and distance between people within our community, then that isn't necessarily a poor outcome. But I think that with the right amount of support and an attempt to genuinely and meaningfully work together, for mine, I think we can deal with those sort of problems. I don't think they necessarily have to wind up in a bad place. I think there are some people who would seek to bring in problematic aspects of other parts of the world, and our system should be robust enough to identify that. And I'm talking about a range of people coming from situations where there is a whole lot of conflict, whether in Africa or other parts of Europe. And to the extent that those people might want to continue that conflict among people groups here, well, we should not allow that. We absolutely should not allow that. And I'm certainly not saying that there should be just a blanket approval to come on in and have at it, because I think there is a role to make sure that people come here with the right reasons and with the right mindset. But I think those things can be managed through the system being operated properly. And I think it's a worthwhile discussion.
Indeed. Jean, did you want to jump in on any of that? Because I've got plenty to rant about, but people have heard my voice quite a lot.
All I would say is I think we're already starting to see the impacts on social cohesion. I've just been surprised at without getting into the issues, because they're complex issues, but the rallies, the frequency and the size of the Free Palestine rallies have been just extraordinary. And I think at times they have veered into anti-Semitism, and I think we're just seeing tragic consequences of that. So I think we're starting to see the impacts on social cohesion already, and we've got the concerns about terrorism. I commented, like John and I had been talking about this even before Bondi, and someone wrote to me and said, well, what evidence is there that there are concerns about social cohesion and people not sharing our values? Well, the evidence is that ASIO has been warning about this for the last year or so, that there is a risk of terrorist incidents in Australia, and this is what happens. So I think we're already seeing the impacts of an immigration program that's meant we've imported people who haven't shared our values and are causing serious issues in our community. I think we're already seeing it.
Should we see how much trouble I can get into?
What's this?
Go ahead.
I saw that there was a figure of 18,000 people who have at some point been under observation from ASIO connected to this, Jean. What do you think? Should all of those 18,000 people, if they don't pass the test, what do you think we should be doing with them?
Well, if we can deport them, let's deport them. Whatever we can do to keep Australians safe.
You realise there's a chance that they're the three of us are now on their list for having this evil dissident conversation that is too politically incorrect for the like of the the liking of the woke ASIO mobs. So they'll put us on their watch list.
No, but we're supporting. We're actually supporting ASIO's work, aren't we?
You don't know what ASIO is doing. And ASIO says themselves the biggest risk they have are not those Muslim terrorists. No, of course not. They wouldn't hurt a fly. It's those white people who have conversations about immigration policy. They are the biggest risk to this country, according to ASIO, which I think is utter bullshit and gives me absolutely no faith that they are watching the right people.
But is that what they said? I'm not sure he said that. Go ahead, Pete.
So to be fair, if we have a look at the number of incidences that have occurred, Wallumbilla, there was a police officer in Queensland, and of course there was that situation with Des Freeman down in Victoria. There have been a number of sovereign citizen incidents where, people have used firearms, taken lives, awful situations. The common factor there, though, is that a lot of those people feel like they don't belong or feel that the society that they grew up in is something they can be part of. And I think the difference is people who come into our society and never joined it. Much like the two absolutely, I was trying to use the right word, but the two bastards that committed the atrocities in Bondi are people who came to a society, and one who was born here, and chose not to adopt our values. That, I think, is different to people who are in our society and have drifted apart and have had their heads filled with a bunch of information, conspiracy theories and the like, and then have acted in a way that is absolutely intolerable, unacceptable, and we've seen some tragic outcomes there too, where people have lost their lives. The problem, though, is different, and I think in the context of this debate around immigration and community, I think we should be focusing on the people who come here, choose to come here, and choose not to come here in good faith to assimilate, to join into our community and to enrich our community, but instead choose to come and behave in a way that ultimately leads to tragedies like we saw at Bondi. And the other point that I'd like to make in relation to some of those protests, I think it got to a point for me, my observation of a couple of people who took part of that was it got fashionable. It was fashionable to go out and say these things and put your flag on and make these chants. And I think this is one of the real difficulties the Prime Minister ran into when he reflected on Grace Tame. Look, it was a poor choice of word, but I think it is fair to say that what's going on there is very difficult because the entire situation is. And more broadly, I think that there's a couple of social media influencers that I get reels sent to me every now and then, and one of them is Lauren Dubois, for example, who has become thoroughly fascinated with the concept of Palestine. And I think it's got less to do with the true understanding of some of the broader issues and more of an alignment and an identification with the victim, or what a perceived victim might be inside that debate. And I think because a lot of other Westerners just latched on to this perception that had been sold, that the Palestinians were victims of a broader right-wing Israeli government, it became very fashionable. It was never dealt with, and it got out of control. And so these protests, in my view, were allowed to grow, and that they gave license to people who took advantage of some of those naive supporters, and that led to a situation that, I don't want to say it was entirely the fault for, but it led to a situation where we've seen some really, really awful anti-Semitic attacks, and we really have to do something about that in this country. I think, quite frankly, to have the debate shift just onto firearm regulation, I think is a bit of a cop-out. I think it's a lot easier for some sectors of politics to say, well, we're going to clamp down on guns, rather than dealing with anti-Semitism, because that is a much more difficult problem in society for people to grab onto. And it's much easier just to pick on people who own firearms and like to engage in that hobby. And if I come back to the broader point here, really, it comes down to people whether they want to in good faith, join in with our community and have a better place to live. And call me a naive optimist maybe, but I think generally speaking, that's why most people come here. There are some bad people. There are lots of evil people in the world, and with a well-functioning visa system and immigration system, we should be weeding those people out, and that's ASIO's job. I hope they can figure out how to do it better.
All right, but gents, shall we see in a couple of minutes how much trouble I can get into? Because I think you are both utterly full of shit and everything was wrong. So let me start. Firstly, I just don't trust ASIO. The idea that we can trust these bureaucrats with the amount of ridiculous amount of power they have of a life and death, not literally as in killing us, but destroying people's lives. I don't trust them. So that's just the first thing. Secondly, this idea that we can rely on people sharing our values, I think that is a dangerous path to go down, because values is such a nebulous and meaningless concept. Do you believe in goodness and kittens and butterflies? Do you love your family? I mean, listen to what people say when they talk about the values. When they ever try to add some values, they stumble, they are, and they say motherhood statements. There's nothing that ever would exclude most people on earth. Like nearly everybody in Gaza and Iraq and South Sudan and North Sudan, for that matter, would say that they try to do the right thing. They want to obey the law as they see it, and they love their family, and they care and compassion. Everyone says this, right? So I think it's a dangerous path to go down, where if you describe values that are broad enough to be as tolerant, as inclusive as you want to be, you describe a set of values that are so inclusive that they don't exclude anyone, or they only exclude someone who walks up and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm a terrorist. Can I tick the terrorist box on the form?" I mean, no one's ticking that box. Even if you are a terrorist, you're going to just not tick the terrorist box. So it's like, I don't think people are concerned about crazy terrorists showing up, but I also think that's a little bit of an easy thing to fall back on, because as I said before, and I think this is part of it, I think a lot of the angst is coming from people looking around and going, wait a second, my culture is being changed out from under my feet. I am a Tibetan watching my population go from a 60% majority to a 40% minority to a 20% minority to a 10% minority to being, in your example, Pete, the last white kid left at the school. And that is an issue of people worried about cultural change. Not worried about, did the immigrants tick the I'm not a terrorist box on the visa form? And here's the thing, if we say we don't want bad people in the country, of course we don't. But the truth is there's billions of good people in the world. That can't be our only criteria, right? The only people we will exclude from Australia are bad people. We will end up with billions of people in the country. That can't be our criteria. And I don't think that's what people want it to be, right? People want migrants to come and fit in to a culture and a people that they already like, because it's already us. And I think another part of this, which a lot of people who would agree with me won't agree with this part of the sentence, a part of what people like about being Australian, and people would say, oh, it's because Australia is the best. It's not about being the best. It's because it is us. And maybe we're not the best, but we are us. My family, maybe there is a better family on earth, but I don't care. It's not my family. I care about my family because it is mine. Right, this community. I don't think Western Morayfield is necessarily the best place to live on earth, but I care about it, not because it's the best, but because it's mine. Right, and the same thing. I think some people do care about Australia, not because it's necessarily the best and only has good people in the world, but because it's ours. And that doesn't just mean anyone from anywhere in the world who is a nice person or ticks the nice person box necessarily fits in. So I think we make the conversation too easy when we say, I want to exclude terrorists. Of course we do. We make the conversation too easy when we say it's just about values, because the values end up being so nebulous. I think it is about culture. But going back one step, so far I've got all of the hard right nodding along, but I don't go where they go, because I think it is about culture, not genetics. Right? And so now they'll throw the...
You've certainly got all the straw men furiously in agreement with you, because you're making one of their arguments. But look, keep going. You're going pretty well, because so far you're 0 for 2, mate. You've been wrong both counts.
Right, not trusting ASIO. Okay, we'll see once you're arrested. But so the other thing I'd make is, I think it is about culture, not genetics, because if it's about genetics, it's you just stop people coming in if they don't look like us. I don't think that is the path. But when it comes to culture, then we need to ask the question of, well, how do cultures evolve? How do they change? right? And if you have a culture and you add extra people, if they got 100 people and you add 2 people into the mix, what happens is those 2 people tend to adjust to the 100. Now they might bring some, spicy food or an interesting hobby or something like that we can learn from, but overwhelmingly they're going to have to learn our language and fit in with our customs and probably, have the same days off work that we have off work and all the rest of it. If you have 4 people coming in out of 100, that would probably still work. If you start having a lot of people come in and then they all go to the same place and then the government gives them billions of dollars to subsidize them to not integrate, I think you start having a very different situation, right? And so that's, you said before actually that you wanted them, you thought we could encapsulate more people who would come over and integrate. But we've had an official policy for decades in this country not to integrate. Asking people to integrate is racist, Pete, how dare you? Multiculturalism is pretty much the theory of not integrating. You notice it doesn't say multiracialism, it says multiculturalism. Pretty much everyone in Australia is happy with multiracialism, but one theory says come and assimilate into a culture, bring the best you've got, but assimilate into it. And the other one says, come over, live in Australia, but you don't have to assimilate into our culture, keep your separate culture and just live in separate ghettos. And if you want people to assimilate, I think you're saying the same thing that myself and many others are saying. Then the question becomes, what immigration policy is consistent with that? Because 10 million people tomorrow wouldn't be consistent with that. They wouldn't assimilate. They would just replace. 4 people, obviously, would be easily assimilated. Somewhere between 4 and 10 million, there's a magic number. I don't know what it is, but I think that's part of the conversation. And then related to that is, should we actually have these proactive policies of subsidizing separateness, these multicultural departments, which I'm very skeptical of. Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
Can you... bit to answer there. So do you mind just elaborating? What are these billions of dollars the government are handing out to require people not to assimilate? Can you just unpack that for me, please, mate?
Multicultural departments. I mean, a lot of this is at the state government level, but I haven't looked in every state. I haven't looked in Tasmania, for instance. I'd be surprised if they didn't have one. But every state I actually look into has a multicultural department. And they basically just subsidizing people going along to ethnic minority events. And that doesn't seem to me how you would incentivize people to assimilate. Indeed, doing nothing would have a greater incentive to assimilate, because if you did nothing and people just sort of met their neighbors, they would start taking on the habits and the norms of their neighbors. But if you proactively are subsidizing people to be able to celebrate their separateness, I think that is a different path that we have gone down. And that's we've been explicitly subsidizing multiculturalism for a long time now. I mean, I know more about the state-based multicultural subsidies, but I'd be unsurprised if there was also a metric shit ton of federal ones. I just haven't investigated that part of the budget yet. So
where's the harm that arises from suggesting that people who come to our country should continue to enjoy their own, form of culture and share it with us here? I mean, part of the reason why it works so well is because they come to our country and they share it with us. Have a look at so many communities across Australia, so many suburbs across Australia, where Italian and Greek migrants of the 60s and 70s built big concrete brick homes with architecture designs that changed the way Australia built homes fundamentally right across the country. In that very small way, their work ethic and the way that they went about building a lot of those homes changed the face of our country. And I don't think you could say that that's necessarily a bad thing now. So I don't think you should come here and just say, oh, no, well, you can come in, but you've got to leave everything at the door. We'll give you
make it my case.
Here's my case. And off you go, mate.
I wasn't sure. I think you are trying to say you're arguing against me, but from what I can tell, you're arguing for me. The Italians and Greeks came in, were not subsidized. They did not have big multicultural subsidies back then. And then they overwhelmingly assimilated. And now they're playing for the national cricket team and all the rest of it and speaking with an Australian accent. And they've assimilated. No one really thinks they haven't. So we have then about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, took on a policy of sort of doubling the total amount of net overseas migration, and at the same time, significantly increasing the subsidies to encourage those people not to integrate. And I think bringing people in and allowing them to integrate naturally, not like force them day 2, you must immediately eat Vegemite. Well, they should, but I mean, I wouldn't make it a law. All right? But naturally, if people come in and there's 2 outsiders and 100 people already existing there, you just let them exist and they will adapt and adjust into that group of 100. But if instead of bringing 2 in, You bring 30 in, have them all live in the one place, and then subsidize them to not integrate. I think you'll have less integration with that policy framework than you will with the old policy framework, the one that worked so well with the Greeks and Italians of the 70s.
Look, I'm really keen to talk a bit more about the values aspect of immigration, but let me just tidy one thing up here. I don't think anyone's really advocating that we should have a complete open door to anyone who comes in. Not even the Americans have kept that up. I mean, the old bring us your weak and your poor and everyone else, and you can come in as you want. The thing about it is there really does has to be a properly managed system and intake. And that has to be, not that it should be, but it must be, by reference to what our community and our society, and to a certain extent, our economy does require, whether by skills, whether by distance, suburb of arrival, so on and so forth. But let me come to the broader point here about what you said about values, because I think that's horseshit, Muppet. I mean, the thing about it is there are certain aspects that you can water down a set of motherhood statements and then call them values. Doesn't make them any more values. But I think we should be fair to come about this debate. Number one, rule of law, right? I mean, the rule of law shouldn't be just you can stick to the laws that you think. I mean, it's not just lex in justa non est lex. The fact of the matter is, if the law is in place, you have to follow it. And if you don't, it should be a condition of your visa and you should be out. I mean, quite frankly, show me someone who says that we should have someone in our country who willingly disobeys the laws and should be allowed to stay, because I'd like to understand exactly where that person's head's at.
Just to follow up on that before you go to the next one, though, I mean, show me a person when they come into the country that they will tick the box saying, I won't follow the law. That's so you're not going to actually separate the wheat from the chaff there. And everyone in every country would say you have to obey the law, and then everyone will say yes. So I don't know if we've actually got anywhere in separating people out if you've asked a question with 100% answer rate.
Well, I think...
by the way, I would also argue we don't have the rule of law in Australia. We have so many laws that it is possible for the enforcers of the laws to cherry pick which parts they enforce. And I think that's an inevitable part of having so many laws. I think the amount of regulations we have, I think somebody did a study in America that found out the average person breaks 6 laws a day without knowing it, because there are just so many laws, it's impossible not to break laws. And so all you need to do is have a sheriff or a judge or someone who doesn't like you, and they choose which laws to enforce, and they can fuck you up royally. Apologies for the language. And that's not rule of law, right? So I would say we already struggle to meet our own values. So kick everyone out of the country. But if you just ask them to tick a box, you'll have 8 billion people who can tick that box tomorrow.
Yes, of course, people are going to say that they will. But the reality is, if over time they are shown by their actions that they don't follow the law, well, then we should be, considering whether or not we want them to stick around. But more broadly, there are other values. I mean, egalitarianism, treating people with respect and dignity. I think there are a range of different things that sets our society apart from plenty of other societies that do give us a meaningful set of values. And look, we can have a debate about semantics and what should or shouldn't be as part of those. I don't think.
Well, let's do that, because I mean that's kind of the point. When you say respect and dignity, I think everyone will say yes to that. They'll be thinking different things, but they'll all say yes. When you say egalitarianism, a lot of people point to women's rights and treating women equally. Firstly, I don't agree with that, so I guess I'm not an Australian. But secondly, no one who fought as a digger in World War II agreed with that. So are they not Australian? Are we really saying that everyone who fought for Australia in World War I and World War II, they're not Australians? But sort of modern woke people, they're the real Australians? Because that to me just doesn't ring true.
Look, I'm sorry, I'm really struggling to follow your logic on that one, mate. You lost me at you didn't believe in women's equality. I must have misunderstood, because I don't think that's what you really think. Look,
no, I don't believe in treating people equal. I would, if a man crossed the line, I'd eventually punch him. If a woman crossed the line, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't punch a woman, because I treat men and women differently, because I think they are different.
Well, okay. I'm not necessarily sold that you should be hitting blokes or women, but here's one for you, right? I think that there are, and I think you've already alluded to it in this debate, that there are certain qualities that do encapsulate the Australian culture. And I think we can dig through and find a couple of those. But fundamentally, if you're going to come to this country and you're going to do so in a way that doesn't treat people with respect. So if you're going to run around, engage in anti-Semitism, engage in behaviour that's just going to be unlawful, it doesn't have to be a very high threshold. Because the definition by which we let people into the country isn't just do they subscribe to our values, but it should be, and absolutely in my view must be, an unquestionable threshold of whether or not they come in. If you come here and you show that you're not going to behave in a way that's appropriate for our community, well, frankly speaking, you should be questioning as to why you want to be here. Why do you want to come here if you don't want to behave in a way that's joining into the community that's here? Look, I don't want to make too fine a point of this. I don't buy that asking people to celebrate the culture where they come from is necessarily incentivizing them to not assimilate. I think there's two different aspects of that. There's a push and a pull type mechanism that you can meet people halfway. I mean, quite frankly speaking, we don't just have to celebrate Christmas in this country. I think having Moon, having Tet, having various other celebrations of other cultures, New Year, and other so on, and other ceremonies, I should say, is a good thing, and we should be looking at that. Having a look at the American system, bringing in Thanksgiving. I think that is something that in our family we look at, and Halloween as well. So, I mean, these are contributions to our society, to our community, and to our culture that I would say are generally positive. I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to have a look at some of those examples and say that they're negative. But hey, I'd like to hear you try, John.
Oh yeah, I think we're running out of time, so I don't know if I'll do a full effort. Firstly, you said coming here and join into the community. That's exactly what I'm calling for, but joining into the community, not joining into abstract values. My point before is values change. So are we saying that the people who don't hold today's values aren't real Australians? So what does that mean for the diggers that fought in World War I and World War II? Many of whom, by the way, were just out and out sexist and racist. So they're not real Australians? I guess you could say that. I mean, I think our culture is something that is ours, including good and bad parts, including the fact that it evolves over time. The defining feature is not that it has X, Y values. It's that it is ours, right? And it is our culture that has evolved over time with good and bad parts, and it's not exactly the same. So I think people today who are more egalitarian, they are Australian, and the diggers who fought back in the day who are less egalitarian are also Australian, because there is a continuity between the culture of the people in Australia. And that's the people that I'm concerned about. But I also think a growing percentage of Australians are concerned about that stream of continuity lasts. And look, it can evolve and it can change. And I just said it changed. It's changed massively between the world wars and now. It's still the same culture, and it can change again and be the same culture. But if you literally picked up, how many people have we got now? 27 million people in Australia. If you picked up 27 million people in Australia and put them in South India, and you picked up 27 million people from South India and you put them in Australia, and you did that overnight, the next day, would Australia, the landmass of Australia, actually be the same place, the same culture and the same people? I mean, they're all on the magic dirt, so I guess it's made them magically Australian. We all know that isn't true, though. I mean, I lived in Cambodia for 4 or 5 years. I was learning to speak the language. I love the food. No one was ever going to mistake me for a Cambodian. There is something about a continuity of a people that where those people enjoy their own existence, even if they've made mistakes in the past, even if they change what their values are. So pointing at specific values, I think, can be dangerous, because it basically just entirely throws out the idea of this continuity of a culture in a place, and says instead that whatever the values are, whatever the mores are of our culture in the last 5 years, those are the defining features. And I also worry, look, I think one thing where we totally agree, and perhaps this is a good point we can all rally around, is I think people who come here and then break our laws, that should be a grounds for kicking them out if we can. So maybe that's a point we agree on. But I worry when you say things like I thought you were getting close to saying if they came to this country and committed hate speech, we should kick them out, which worries me, because part of our culture, I would say, is to be tolerant of people who have crazy, wacky ideas that we currently don't agree with. And so to some degree, tolerating that is a part of the culture I'd like to hold on to.
Yeah, John, so in terms of values, I would push back on you because I think there are values that say traditional Australians, and the British in particular, it's from our British heritage. I guess a notion of tolerance, of non-violence, of a notion of fairness, and a belief in free speech and free expression, and not letting religion dominate everything. And I think there are cultures out there, and I think we've seen this. There's a recent video that's gone viral where a female police officer in the UK has stood up against a mob was it in Whitechapel, and the mob was they were trying to kick out a Christian preacher. They're saying, oh, he's causing trouble, and she goes, well, hang on, we can't do that. He's allowed to have his say. So I think there are values that we hold, and that particular cultures or elements of that culture who may come into Australia don't subscribe to and will cause trouble. So, yeah, I'd push back on you saying this values thing is completely nebulous.
Well, I think you mentioned there things that could also be described as cultural traits and things that can be potentially undermined if we have a sudden importation of people who have vastly different cultural traits. Like, not everyone has the same value of freedom of speech and tolerance. Indeed, it seems to me that a majority of Australians currently don't have it. So
some don't. Yeah. Okay.
It's a very easy thing to lose, it seems.
I think that is entirely to our detriment, that we as a society have lost the perception of the value of the freedom of speech. I mean, it's very easy to joke about these sort of things, but the reality is, if you're not free to really express ideas and debate them in the society that we live, within certain parameters, of course, there is a much bigger cost that comes to that community. Because the reality is, the only way that you can really ever achieve dealing with some of the bigger issues that any community, any group of people is going to have to deal with over its development is to sit down and talk about it. And as soon as you start saying, well, we're not prepared to talk about it because you might offend me or I might offend you or so on and so forth, is to say, well, there has to be separation. And I think far more than any money that's been spent under a multicultural program, that would lead to true separation and division within a society. And that is entirely to our detriment, in my view.
Well, I'm offended by that. So it is worth noting that Chris Minz's comment that, of course, we can't have a multicultural society and free speech. And since they don't go together, we have to shut down free speech. And at first I thought he must have misspoke, but he's repeated it several times over. So he really does mean that. So yeah, he's saying you have to choose. If we have to choose, I'd like them to put it to a referendum instead of him just choosing on our behalf. Hopefully, I think, Pete, you would say we don't have to choose.
No, I think fundamentally, if you break down all of the various tools that are at his disposal to be able to deal with the challenges that New South Wales has, and there are many, the ability to get people to sit down and actually genuinely reach consensus has to be a large part of that. And as soon as you start saying, oh, we're going to ban protest, oh, we're going to ban people from getting together, we're going to ban this, we're going to ban that. I mean, I don't want to just resort to a slippery slope argument, but you do make it infinitely more difficult for anyone to be able to meaningfully address these concerns. So where does that leave us? Where are we going to have? Are we just going to start saying, well, you have these suburbs, you can have these suburbs, and it's just too much of a risk for you to be able to engage at all? Is that
going to be worse than that? It's going to be worse than that because we don't have that degree of political decentralization. It's going to be whoever has the political power sets the rules about what you can say, and everyone lives within those rules or gets a knock on the door from the ASIO you guys trust so much. But with that parting little piece of snark,
I wasn't saying, I'm not being naive, John. I'm just saying that I think he was, the head of ASIO was right about the threat to Australia. And you're suddenly saying that we're all sort of pro. I mean, I'm not necessarily being naive. I recognize the problems of excessive state power, but I think in this instance they were correct. I
admitted that was snark, right? I was being cheeky. I was being gratuitous. Okay. It just seemed like an easy one to say. So I was being an asshole, I think the technical term is. I have that nasty habit occasionally. With your indulgence then, gents, we're past 2 hours. Let's throw to some of the comments from the crowd. And if you had something you were about to say, just sort of segue it into responding to the crowd anyway. So then we can keep going. I put this one up before, but just Ozzy pointed out, apparently one nation solution is zero immigration. And he says when the rubber hits the road, they're going to have to be more nuanced. Skills, less students. Yeah, you've heard Gene me rant about this before. I think the one nationistas are focused on the wrong part of the visa train, right? They want to make sure fewer people set foot in Australia. My suggestion is we should focus on how many people get PR and citizenship. So I wouldn't be making sure people don't set foot in the country, but I would be saying just because you set foot in the country, that doesn't give you such an easy ride into PR and citizenship. But yes, at some stage, we're going to have to get more nuance there. Can't shut down immigration, would crash the housing Ponzi, need to reduce it, but priority to skills shortage, not basket weavers, YouTubers. Hey, we're YouTubers right now. And foreign students. Yeah, so look, a lot of people rip on the foreign students, and I agree. We do have to, Gene, we've talked about this before. The university system is propped up with foreign students. Now, I'm fine with that because I think the university system is a rot and it needs to like crash and burn and sort of die a horrible fiery death. But most people don't agree with me on that. So to me, it's a double benefit, right? You wind back the number of foreign students, and that also causes some universities to crash and shut down courses that shouldn't exist. To me, that's a double benefit. But for people who I haven't convinced yet that university is now a net drain on productivity and happiness, if you haven't been convinced by that yet, then you do face a difficult choice, right? This is a trade-off. If you want to maintain the current university system, tell me how. It's foreign students, massive extra government subsidies, or much higher costs for university degrees for Australian domestic students. Those are your three options. And the government has chosen the path of least resistance, which is rely on foreign students. If we want to cut that one off, tell me which other one you're taking. I take burning down the unis, but if you don't agree with me, tell me what path you're taking. Because what path are you taking? But yes, okay, sorry. Metaphorically, don't literally burn down the universities. Any sovereign citizens, listen again. Pete, which one would you take with the universities? Keep the foreign students coming in, or one of the other options?
They're not fit for purpose. The reality is the higher education scheme in Australia is so woefully out of touch with the needs of the economy and of their students. You know, the number of times that I see graduates coming to businesses and have to be basically entirely retrained, taking months, if not years, to come up to actual productivity, you know, being productive, just says to me that, you know, our higher education sector is just metaphorically in need of a bomb.
Metaphorically. Thank you, Gene. You got to keep us in line with our loose language. All right. I think this was the person that was picking on you last time, Gene. We need a right-wing representation, but One Nation are just another pack of liberals here is meant in the pejorative, sort of wishy-washy centrist lefty term. Anna can correct me if that's not what she means, but I've seen her other comments. Another load of liberals in favor of yet more immigration. So we'll see if there's going to be like America has seen Farage on the right sort of supersede the Tories, and now we see a movement on the right edge of Farage. I don't know if Australia is running 1 or 2 years behind the UK, but if that's the case, should we expect to see an Anna, I don't know how to say your name, Anna, an Anna party coming from further to the right from Pauline at some stage? I don't know. What do you think, Pete? Is that possible that we'll get? Who is that guy, Rupert Lowe in the UK, who's set up Restore Britain? It's supposed to be another step to a bit more hardline on remigration or deportation.
Look, I don't think Australia is going to go to that extreme because, quite frankly, we don't have the deep problems that we have that have arisen in the UK from their unrestricted migration of certain people groups, of which many of them are Muslim. Let's be honest about it. But the reality is there is a serious problem in Australia in that there are so many people who have that perception, as I said at the start. So we do need to be listening to those people and understanding why they think they're not the priority of our system. And that is a broader problem that I think has many more factors than just the religion or the colour of the skin of the people coming into the country.
I think this one was aimed at you, Pete. This is from Anna again. She picked on Gene last time, so just, don't feel like you're being isolated. Australia needs reverse immigration. That's the Restore Britain theme. Here's a comment about Tim Wilson from our earlier chat. Apparently, he's talking about a top income tax rate with a 3 in front of it. So that would be that would take us back to the reforms that Costello was pitching at the end of the Howard Costello years, where they were trying to bring down the top marginal tax rate. It would be great to see them do it. I mean, here I find myself in the weird position of having pitched a more moderate proposal. I'd assume that I do. Of course, as people can see from the last half hour, I'm clearly the moderate of the group. But on the assumption that it was going to be too politically hard to get the top marginal tax rate down, I've just suggested, well, at least then put the threshold up to $500,000 or even $1 million, so the top marginal tax rate can just be the millionaire's tax, and then the rest of us can pay less. But I mean, if Tim's going to be able to get away with going further. Or maybe he's doing Trump's the art of the deal and pushing this as the opening gambit and then compromises somewhere in the middle. But good luck to him. Good luck to him. Anna, again, not a fan of liberalism, has caused untold damage to our nation. Maybe we need to get a Anna versus Pete and Jean fight.
Well, what's the counterfactual? If it's not liberalism, where are we going? Honestly, I mean, anyway, yeah, maybe a debate.
I actually think liberalism is an overloaded word here that creates more confusion and a lot of conversations, because I think that word can mean a lot of different things. Like I think there is a version of liberalism that is a decaying element in Western civilization. And I think there's an element of liberalism that created modern Western civilization. And I don't think they're just the same thing. And so eventually good turns to bad. I think there are different parts of this thing that is bundled together in one overloaded word of liberalism. So it may be that I agree with her. It may be that I vehemently disagree. Until I know what she means by liberalism, I don't really know the answer. But I do worry that some people have just used it now as a swear word. Liberalism has just become a swear word to some people. I think they might be missing out on some of the important contributions liberalism made to our culture in the past. An economic comment. Cut spending first. The real world tightens its belt, reduces costs while also trying to increase revenue. Labor needs to learn this. Sadly, no ability to block supply like the 1975. Well, there's going to be no ability to block supply because, spoiler, the left is going to control the Senate after the next federal election. So whatever hopes you had for 2028, keep the rage alive and have those hopes for 2031, because the last election was a big Senate victory to the left. It's going to take 2 elections to unwind that. It's going to have to be 2 quite big right of center victories if you want to be able to pass legislation through the Senate. So anyone who's trying to put together an agenda for fixing the country from 2028 to 2031, your agenda is going to have to be regulatory or state-based, because there ain't going to be much legislation getting passed with the Greens holding balance of power. So, sorry. Is that your assessment too, Pete? You're a numbers watcher?
Look, there are a number of factors of international events that are likely to happen before 2028. You have a look at what might happen in the South China Sea. Other factors as we get. Well, look, let me be blunt. We're now well past the State of the Union timeframe. So, look, if China invades Taiwan in 2027, as we're told they will, as they are telling everyone they will, as they're running drills saying they will, as they're literally sending ships out into the middle of the China Sea, the South China Sea, in formation that you can see it from satellites. I mean, 2027 is going to be a big year. After that, you've got Donald Trump. He will probably lead the Republicans to losing most of the midterms. He'll be a lame duck president in his last term. He's already got the Supreme Court telling him that some of his executive power, executive orders are not going to be supported by what should have otherwise been a pretty conservative Supreme Court. You're going to have a president who's getting pushed into a corner, and that's when people do erratic things. But this is a guy who does erratic things as BAU. So where does he go to after that? So China, the United States, what does that mean for Australia as a middle power? We're a price taker, not a price setter when it comes to international policy. I mean, the reality is, what does the world look like? What does Australia look like in 2028? Well, hey, for my money, I reckon there's some pretty significant international events that will largely determine where we are in the cycle on, good times make soft people make bad times make hard people have to fix it. So I think that's the part of the cycle that we're likely to be going into over the next couple of years. But hey, ceteris paribus, if we're only talking about where the last couple of years of Senate politics have been leading us, well, John, you're probably right. And it's probably going to be a left of center Senate for the next couple of years.
Do you think there's a chance international events create a political blowout in 2028 that could be so big as to change the maths?
Potentially.
Yeah. And is that something that actually favours Andrew Hastie? I mean, is that a possibility?
Uh,
Is Taylor just an interim before Hastie comes in?
Look, gentlemen, my view on Andrew Hastie is that he's got some time to go before he's ready to lead the broader Liberal Party. I'd like to see Andrew actually go and do some further study and development, and so he's able to communicate better in terms of economic policy. I think that his big push for sovereign industry, rolling out of Ford from the 70s and 80s, was a poor look. I think he could have thought that through better. And to be able to communicate a difficult message, what I should say is to communicate a complex message, you have to be able to resonate with more than just the boomers. And I think he's well placed to do that when he's ready, but he's not going to be ready for some time. Angus is a phenomenally intelligent bloke. If he can communicate his thoughts in a way that resonate with Australians, I think he will do very, very well. And, when I look at the way the shadow cabinet has been put together and the policy committees that are in there being led by Simon Kennedy and Zoe McKenzie, I see an opportunity for them to really turn around and start growing from here. But obviously it's a long road to go.
Right, so an endorsement for the current leader. And I was going to ask you, we didn't get around to asking that, but your thoughts on the cabinet. But you're relatively impressed by the new cabinet, LNP?
Yes, generally speaking. I think there's some people who have a bit to prove. I think there are some people that come in with some pretty high expectations. We talked about Tim Wilson. I think Senator Claire Chandler is someone you should keep a very close eye on as the Shadow Finance Minister. She is a very intelligent person. I think so far has not really had the opportunity to shine, and the finance portfolio is one where I think she could do very, very well. So I'd say as well, there's some very big expectations there. John O'Dunningham in Home Affairs, I think is a terrific communicator, and I think he'll do very well. James Patterson in Defence. If there was ever a time when the coalition needed someone of his depth in that policy area, I think James will do very, very well. And Anne Ruston in Health and Aged Care. I mean, we've got growing problems in the health portfolio in terms of expenditure right across the country. Aged care is exactly the same. Sam Ray must have done something to earn his new position, but I feel that from the outside, it certainly looks like he copped a hospital pass with the Commonwealth Home Support Package transition, because it just doesn't look like that's been set up to succeed. I think there's a lot of work to do in that space, and I'd like to see how they're going to fix that, because there's not a lot of clarity in that, and that's even before we get to the NDIS. Yes, they've agreed to try and limit growth to 4%, but I don't see how we're really going to do that. We're talking about shifting big chunks, foundational supports and psychosocial matters and others off to the states, but still, someone's going to pay for that. It's not just people are going to go without services. So how we deal with that challenge, and that's before you get to DVA. I heard some research today that said that DVA is on a trajectory to cost the country as much as the NDIS in 10 years. I mean, the NDIS, when it started, was 160 million. We're now talking, correct me if I'm wrong, tens of billions of dollars. And so for Veterans Affairs to be headed in the same direction should be a serious cause for concern at the federal level. So to have people like Melissa McIntosh leading the coalition response to NDIS, for example, as someone who represents a Western Sydney seat, who understands both sides of being the people who do have to rely on that, while also having to put together the policy settings to make sure it's sustainable and does largely what it was set up to do. I think she's very well placed to do that. So yeah, I think there are some really talented people in there. There's some people who are yet to make their name for themselves, and I think they've now got the opportunity to do so. Led by Angus and Senator Hume, I'm keen to see where they go from here.
All right. just keep it moving through a few of these. There's a few of these are just more comments. CGT change 100%, another tax grab. I think there's a lot of agreement here. Instant capital deduction. Amen, Aussie. Amen. One suggestion for how you can dodge tax. Well, this goes to your point before a little bit, Gene, when we're saying that. Well, who was it? You said Ken Henry was saying that there's housing investment is just a way to dodge tax. The whole negative gearing, because I think Pete made a good point that it sounded like he was talking about capital negative gearing, that he had negative gearing in mind, and he just sort of switched topics halfway through. But it's always been strange to me. Of course, people aren't aiming to negatively gear; they'd prefer to positively gear because then you're just making more money.
Yeah,
I mean, negatively gear means you're losing, so you pay less tax because you've got less income. All right, so just positively gear and you pay more tax because you're richer. That's so. But anyway. If you've got any here, Gene, that you want to bring up, let me know.
We put up Taylor's comment there. Is it
haven't got to it yet? If you've got it, feel free to bring it up. Oh, okay, there we go. Yep.
Is it reasonable to assume that the increase in multiculturalism has had a negative impact on national identity, thus national security and defence through decreased enlistment in ADF? Good question. I mean, I think ADF enlistment's probably fallen, hasn't it, over the decades? I think they've certainly got an issue attracting the right people. I think that's probably the case, isn't it?
Well, as is their budget to be able to... As is their budget to be able to sustain people. So there might be fewer people to do it, but we also have less money to pay them. So it may match in the end. So look, I think the sort of people who join the ADF are probably the sort of people who do have some amount of buy-in to the Australian project and are by the act of enrolling in the ADF are probably showing a greater sense of loyalty to Australia as, you know, a concept of an ongoing culture. Than many other people. So look, a few dodgy apples could sneak in. But they go through a lot of tests to get in. As someone who's going through the process of joining the Army Reserves now,
aren't you a bit old for the Army Reserves to join the Army Reserves?
I'm a bit old for everything, but unfortunately, this is the only age I've got. So this is they're still letting me in. All right, so that maybe that just shows a problem of standards. The standards are too low if they're letting me in, right? So.
Well, maybe Taylor's onto something if they're looking at me. But I saw, you're all familiar with the Gurkhas, right?
Yeah.
In the British military. I saw a proposal to do something similar for Palm Islanders and Pacific Islanders, I should say, here in Australia. And I got to say, I saw a lot of sense in that. People who want to come to the country doing so through the mechanism of serving our country and protecting it in the first instance. That made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think. I mean, that kind of fits with my point about encouraging people who are buying into the existing cultural group. I think that's a way to show it, and we risk getting close to the Starship Troopers idea. If that is the way of getting citizenship, you serve, and you don't get a vote until you serve, right? But no, maybe we don't go that far. I'll go that far. You guys wouldn't. How do you filter for people coming here for the right? We kind of touched on this already. That everyone's just going to tick the "I'm a good person" box. It is a tricky one. I would say I would have a bias towards people who already share some cultural similarities, because I don't think you're going to be able to put a viable values test unless you do what I think Pete would agree with, which you let people in on a temporary basis and actually observe, did they obey the law? And if they didn't, you can kick them out.
Yeah, and even if we had a government organisation that could do that monitoring, perhaps even if we knew them by an acronym, maybe ASIO. But hey, I think there is one people group that we could have a look at this through that lens, and that is the so-called ISIS brides. I mean, frankly speaking, I think it's disingenuous to refer to them as anything other than conspirators. I mean, the reality is they're over there, they're with ISIS. To suggest that they were somehow not to be held to the same level of account as the fighters just because they were doing the support act. In my mind, I don't see how you can meaningfully draw a distinction between the two. So to Ozzy's point, how do you filter for people coming here for the right reasons? Well, there's one. Have a look at their actions.
Yes, I think there's another typically asshole-ish, hard-hearted thing for me to say here, which again maybe isn't good politics, but I think there is the comment from the people defending these women saying that some of them are good people, their kids are good people. Our role in setting an immigration system isn't to just let in good people. There are lots of good people in the world. We have to have standards that are higher than that, and this is clearly a risk. It's a risk we don't have to take, and it is also a symbol we can give, a signal that if that's the sort of behavior you're intending to pursue, that is the sort of thing that cuts you off. So look, I'm not saying that these people are necessarily even bad people. I mean, a lot of these conversations come down to bad and don't let them in, good and let them in. I think there's a lot of people who are good that I still wouldn't let in. And that's because I think there's a lot of good people in the world, but I can't take all 8 billion of them. I'm sorry to any I subscribe that might be good people. Yeah.
I think at some extent there has to be part of the debate that is, who are the people that Australia needs to bring in? It's not just a complete open door.
Here's an answer to a question we had earlier. Thank you, Aussie. NDAS, 53 billion and climbing. I haven't read this one yet, so this is dangerous. This is to you, Pete, and this will probably be the last one we do. Let's hope it's PG rated. Are you sure Angus Taylor's intelligent? We've all seen fantastic, great move. Well done, Angus. I think that's probably a staffer, so that's unfair. That alone really makes him look like a tool. Do you think he won't let the libs fall further? Well, this is a chance for you to monologue on the glories of Angus.
You've already said it, John. I think if you can only find one simple error made that long ago to latch onto, I think you're not looking very hard. Look, and I think I don't know the facts around that, but I'm almost certain that there's a poor little electorate officer 10 years down the track that still feels awful about that. Look, the reality is, you only got to look at the guy's resume to determine whether or not he's intelligent. But as we've been saying tonight, look, don't take his words for it. Let's see what he actually delivers in terms of policy and where he takes the coalition, because that for me is, even if he's as intelligent as I know him to be, that will be the test by which voters will make their choice.
And I've got to say, this is one reason, if there's no others, this is one reason to hope for an Angus Taylor victory in the election, because the front page of the newspaper the next day, fantastic, great move, well done, Angus. That's worth it. That's worth the price of admission. All right, gents. I think we're coming up to 2.5. This might be a record. So I think we should wrap it up. So final thoughts, gents, from anything we've discussed already, or if you've got something totally new to pull out of your sleeve. Final thoughts, Mr. Gene.
Oh, that was a wide-ranging going, John. I'm going to be thinking about that for the next week or so. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. We went places I never expected. So I have to think more about that whole values issue and culture. I think you make some provocative points I've got to think more about. So yeah, good stuff.
All right, Gene. Pete, any last words or thoughts on that long winding chat?
Yeah, I got a few. Look, first of all, guys, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. I really enjoyed our chat, and for those of you who are watching along online, John and I, on the odd occasion do enjoy a thing called beer, and our chats get progressively probably less suitable for a show that I'm pretty sure my mum will be the only person who watches. But look, let me just say a couple of things. Number one, for the ASIO officer that has been forced to sit here and listen to these were all jokes. For the Labor Party staffers who are watching this as part of your opposition research, thanks for giving up 2.5 hours of your lives. To the Liberal Party staffers who are watching this as part of a vulnerability analysis, well, thanks very much. Great move, well done. Look, let me just say two things. Number one, there is a serious problem in our country when somewhere between 30% or 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 Australians feel like the system isn't working for them. Quite frankly, it does fall to the coalition to, first of all, listen to those people, to understand why they think that, and to come up with some serious and fair income ways to fix it. It's not simple. It certainly isn't easy. And for my money, a large part of it is some of the policies and government decisions that have been taken over a long period of time that we really have to look at whether or not they're fit for purpose. And a big part of that is going to be convincing the Australian public that some of the mollycoddling, some of the soft approach that state governments have given them over a long period of time are really doing more harm than good. And we really need to revisit whether or not that's the kind of country we want to live in. Finally, I want to leave you on this one particular point. You are inherently right to distrust government agencies. And we talked a bit earlier about ASIO. They are not the decision maker. They are the people who should be providing the data to the elected representatives who we should be able to trust to make those sorts of decisions. And I think, quite frankly, and I say this in no small part, this isn't meant to be done in jest. We really do need to, in this country, think long and hard about how do we improve the political discourse and make sure that we can, first of all, elect people who we can trust with these sort of decisions, but more importantly, can actually hold themselves, in a way where things like freedom of speech, freedom of association are given the respect that those things actually deserve. Because, when premiers are happy just to shut down protest, shut down your right to say things for political convenience, that is the sign of, a real fundamental start of a decay in a society that I have deep concerns could become much more problematic. So the ability to be able to sit down and talk about our problems is fundamental to fixing them. And I think this is, the kind of format that we should be doing it. So well done, gents. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Excellent.
Good to chat.
Yes, thank you very much. And as a final comment, just echoing that at the end with the importance of free speech, part of that is being able to chat to people who you don't currently agree with. And so it's been great to be able to have some disagreement here. I always tell Jean after these episodes finish, I always find them the best episodes are the ones where we disagree on something. And because Jean and I agree on a lot, we find something we can disagree on. I think it adds a bit more illumination to the people being able to listen along to hear the good counter arguments as they go back and forth. So thank you very much, Pete, for showing up. I think we agreed on a lot of issues, butt heads on a few, and I think that's for the good of the discourse. So thank you, everyone who's been listening along. This has been Death and Taxes, the podcast of the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, taxpayers.org.au. Check it out. Go have a look. Check out the campaigns. Join if you are so inclined. We do this every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Queensland time, which is at the moment 8:30 for you dirty Southerners, and probably 8:30 for you as well, Pete, down in Tasmania.
Yeah, mate. Still same country, same.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Different time zone.
So please join us next Thursday. Join on the newsletter, oztaxpayers.substack.com, so you can hear what we're saying and then come join the conversation every Thursday evening. And until next week, thank you for joining us. Stay happy and stay free.